I never thought I'd be the type of person who'd find satisfaction in someone else's downfall. But then again, I never thought I'd be the type of person who'd have their heart shattered by the one person they trusted most. Life has a way of reshaping you, molding you into someone you never expected to become. Sometimes that transformation is beautiful. Other times it's born from the ashes of betrayal, watered with tears and fertilized by rage. 5 years ago, Olivia Bennett looked me in the eyes, those deep hazel eyes I used to get lost in, and told me I was going nowhere in life. That I lacked ambition, drive, and the intelligence needed to succeed in the corporate world. That I was, in her exact words, a perpetual underachiever with delusions of adequacy. Today, I sit behind a mahogany desk on the 28th floor of the Axion Technologies headquarters as their newly appointed director of operations. And tomorrow, Olivia will walk through those doors for a job interview, completely unaware that the boyfriend she discarded like yesterday's trash is now holding the keys to her future. They say success is the best revenge, but I've learned that revenge tastes even sweeter when served with a side of poetic justice. This is how I went from being the guy who would never amount to anything to the man who became her boss, and ultimately the reason she's unemployed. The beginning of the end started on an ordinary Tuesday evening in April. Spring was just beginning to breathe life back into the city after a particularly brutal winter. I remember the scent of rain-washed pavement as I walked home from the subway, stopping at our favorite Thai place to pick up Olivia's usual red curry with extra bamboo shoots. We had been dating for 3 years and living together for 1. I had plans to propose that summer. I was working as a mid-level project coordinator at Meridian Systems, a modest tech company that developed inventory management software. Not glamorous by any means, but it paid the bills and offered stability. Olivia, on the other hand, was a rising marketing executive at Prism Media, one of the city's top advertising firms. She had graduated from Wharton, came from old money, and had connections that opened doors I didn't even know existed. When we first met at a mutual friend's housewarming party, I was surprised she even noticed me. She was magnetic, confident, articulate, and impossibly beautiful with her chestnut hair and perfect smile. I was awkward, slightly overweight, and dressed in what I now realize was a terribly ill-fitting button-down. But somehow she laughed at my jokes and asked for my number by the end of the night. Our relationship progressed quickly, fueled by intense chemistry and shared dreams of building something lasting. At least I thought they were shared dreams. As I juggled the takeout bag and fumbled with my keys, I was mentally rehearsing how to tell Olivia about my performance review that day. I hadn't received the promotion I was hoping for, just a modest raise and a vague promise of future opportunities. I knew she'd be disappointed. She had been pushing me to be more aggressive about advancing my career. Still, I hoped the news of the raise might soften the blow. The apartment was unusually quiet when I entered. No TV, no music, no Olivia tapping away at her laptop on the couch as she normally would be at this hour. "Liv?" I called out, setting the food on the kitchen counter. "Got dinner from Samran's." I heard movement from the bedroom, followed by her voice, tight and controlled. "In here." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. I loosened my tie and walked down the hallway, pushing open the bedroom door to find Olivia sitting on the edge of our bed, scrolling through her phone. She was still in her work clothes, a tailored charcoal pantsuit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. But her normally perfect hair was slightly disheveled, as if she'd been running her hands through it. "Hey," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Everything okay?" She looked up, her expression unreadable. "How was your review?" Of course, that would be her first question. I tried to keep my tone optimistic. "It went pretty well. Got a 5% raise. And the promotion to project manager?" I shifted my weight, suddenly feeling the familiar discomfort that had been creeping into our conversations more frequently. "They went with Barbara. She has seniority and you didn't fight for it," Olivia finished, setting her phone down with deliberate care. "Just like you didn't fight for the team lead position last year." "That's not fair." I expressed my interest, showed them my project success metrics. "Barbara's been there 4 years longer and you accepted their decision without pushing back." She interrupted again. "Do you know what the difference is between people who succeed and people who don't, Eric? It's not talent or even experience. It's hunger. The willingness to go after what you want and refuse to take no for an answer." I felt my face grow hot. Not everyone needs to steamroll others to get ahead. I'm respected at Meridian. That counts for something. She laughed then, a short, harsh sound that felt like a slap. Respect doesn't pay for vacations in Bali or a house in the suburbs. It doesn't build the life we talked about. We're doing fine, I countered, though the defensive tone in my voice betrayed my uncertainty. We both have good jobs. We're saving for a down payment. At the rate you're going, we'll be ready to buy when we're 50. She stood up, crossing her arms. I got offered the senior brand director position today. The abrupt change in topic threw me. At Prism? That's great, Liv. Congratulations. It's in the London office. My heart sank. London? But that's a huge opportunity. Nearly double my current salary plus stock options and an expatriate package. Her chin lifted slightly. I told them I'd accept. The room seemed to tilt slightly. You ... And what? When were you planning to discuss this with me? I'm discussing it now, she said, her voice cooling several degrees. This is career-defining, Eric. I can't pass it up. So what does this mean for us? You want me to look for jobs in London? Because I'd need time to... I don't think that would work. Her gaze was direct now, unflinching. Let's be honest with ourselves. We've been moving in different directions for a while now. The Thai food in the kitchen was forgotten as the full impact of her words hit me. Are you breaking up with me? She sighed, running a hand through her hair. I've been thinking about this for months. We want different things. I'm ambitious. I have plans. Big plans. And you, she gestured vaguely in my direction. You're comfortable where you are. You say you want success, but you don't actually push for it. You're risk-averse to the point of stagnation. That's not true, I protested, though my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. I believe in work-life balance, in building something sustainable. Olivia's laugh was tinged with something that might have been pity. That's what people say when they don't have what it takes to excel. You've been at the same company for 5 years with barely any advancement. You settle for tiny raises instead of demanding what you're worth. You're 31 years old and still living paycheck to paycheck in a one-bedroom apartment. Each word was a dagger, precisely aimed. I felt my throat tightening as the room began to blur around the edges. I thought you loved me for who I am. I did love you, Eric. Part of me still does. Her voice softened slightly, which somehow made it worse. But love isn't enough. Not when I look 10 years down the road and see myself still trying to pull you up to my level. It's exhausting. My level, I repeated, the words tasting bitter. So that's how you see it. You're above me? Professionally? Yes. Her bluntness knocked the wind out of me. And it's becoming increasingly clear that it will always be that way. I stared at her, this woman I'd planned to spend my life with, suddenly a stranger. Why didn't you say something sooner? If you felt I wasn't living up to your expectations, why stay with me for 3 years? She looked away then, the first sign of discomfort she'd shown. I kept hoping you'd change, that you'd find that drive, that hunger I mentioned. But at some point, I had to accept that this is just who you are. Someone who's comfortable with mediocrity. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt like I was free-falling, watching the future I'd imagined disintegrate around me. When do you leave? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. 2 weeks. I've already found a short-term flat in Kensington. She walked to the closet and pulled out a small suitcase. I'll stay with Rachel until then. Give us both some space. You've got it all figured out, don't you? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. She paused, her hand on the suitcase. That's the difference between us, Eric. I planned for success. You hoped for it. I stood there paralyzed as she efficiently packed a week's worth of clothes. Each item folded precisely, each movement controlled and deliberate. That was Olivia. Even in the midst of destroying my world, she was methodical. I'll come back next weekend to get the rest of my things, she said, zipping the suitcase closed. We can talk about breaking the lease then. I'm willing to cover my half through the end of the term. How generous, I thought bitterly, as if the financial arrangement was what concerned me most at that moment. Is there someone else? The question escaped before I could stop it. She paused at the door, suitcase in hand. No, this is about my career and our fundamental incompatibility. Nothing more. I wanted to believe her, but doubt had already taken root. It seemed too convenient, too well-timed. 3 years together, and you can just walk away like this. Like it meant nothing? Something flickered across her face. Regret, perhaps, or just impatience. It meant something, Eric. But sometimes meaning isn't enough. She straightened her shoulders. You're a good man. Kind, loyal, steady. You'll find someone who appreciates those qualities more than I can right now. What I am, I said slowly, finding my voice at last, is more than my job title or salary. Of course you are, she agreed. But the slight condescension in her tone told me everything I needed to know about what she really thought. But potential without action is worthless. And I've waited long enough for you to realize yours. She checked her watch. A Cartier I'd saved for months to give her on our second anniversary. I should go. Rachel's expecting me. Olivia, I said, a last desperate attempt to make sense of the collapsing universe. Do you really believe I'll never amount to anything worthwhile? She hesitated, and for a moment I thought she might soften, might take back the cruel words and judgments. But then she squared her shoulders and met my gaze directly. I believe you'll find a comfortable life, Eric. A job that pays the bills, maybe even a modest promotion eventually. You'll probably find a nice woman who doesn't push you to be more than you are. You'll have a small house in a decent neighborhood, take vacations to the same beach resort every other year, and retire with just enough to get by. She sighed. And maybe that's enough for you. But it was never going to be enough for me. With that final assessment of my limited potential, she wheeled her suitcase out of the bedroom. I heard the front door open and close with a decisive click. And just like that, Olivia Bennett walked out of my life, leaving behind the scent of her expensive perfume and the ruins of my self-worth. I stood motionless in the bedroom for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Then mechanically, I walked to the kitchen, past the cooling Thai food I no longer had any appetite for, opened a cabinet, and pulled out the half-empty bottle of whiskey we kept for special occasions. This, I decided as I poured 3 fingers into a glass, qualified as a special occasion of sorts. The death of a relationship. The death of the future I'd planned. The death in many ways of the man I thought I was. I took a long swallow, welcoming the burn. Then I carried the bottle and glass back to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed where Olivia had delivered her verdict on my life, and proceeded to get spectacularly, comprehensively drunk. The days that followed passed in a blur of numbness, punctuated by sharp stabs of pain. I called in sick to work for 3 days, ignored calls from friends and family, and barely ate. The apartment, once our shared space, now felt like a museum of failure. Each object a reminder of the life I thought we were building. On the 4th day, I forced myself to shower, shave the patchy beard I'd started growing, and return to Meridian. I moved through the motions of my job like a ghost, speaking when spoken to, completing tasks automatically, but feeling completely detached from everything around me. "You okay, Eric?" My cubicle neighbor, Jared, asked during the 2nd week of my zombie routine. "You seem not yourself lately." I managed a weak smile. "Just going through some personal stuff. I'll be fine." But I wasn't fine. Not even close. The weekend Olivia came to collect her belongings was a special kind of torture. She arrived with 2 friends in a rented van, efficiently dismantling her presence from the apartment, while I hid at a coffee shop 3 blocks away, unable to watch. When I returned, the place was half empty, with only my things remaining, looking somehow shabbier and more pathetic, without her designer furniture and artwork to elevate them. She left her key on the kitchen counter, along with a note. "I've transferred my portion of the rent through September. Good luck with everything." Each. Good luck with everything. As if I were an acquaintance she'd met at a networking event, not the man she'd shared a bed with for 3 years. I crumpled the note and threw it across the room, then immediately retrieved it, smoothed it out, and placed it in a drawer. Even in my anger, I couldn't bring myself to discard this final communication. That night, scrolling mindlessly through social media, a masochistic activity I couldn't seem to stop, I saw that Olivia had updated her profile picture. She was smiling broadly, standing in front of the London Eye, looking carefree and radiant. The caption read, "New city, new chapter. Sure London calling, sure new beginnings." No mention of endings. No acknowledgement of who she'd left behind. I was already erased from her narrative. I threw my phone across the room with enough force that the screen cracked when it hit the wall. The sight of the spiderweb glass felt oddly satisfying, a physical manifestation of how I felt inside. That night, lying in the bed that now felt too large, too empty, I replayed Olivia's words over and over. "You're comfortable with mediocrity. I've waited long enough for you to realize your potential. You'll never amount to anything worthwhile." The words festered, infected every memory of our time together. Had she always felt this way? Had she been looking down on me from the beginning, viewing me as some sort of project she could eventually mold into something worthy of her? The humiliation burned worse than the abandonment. The idea that the woman I loved had seen me as fundamentally inferior, as someone to be tolerated rather than admired, shredded what remained of my self-esteem. I began to see our entire relationship through this new tainted lens. The times she'd helped, Me prepare for interviews or suggested improvements to my resume. The gentle nudges toward more ambitious goals. The not-so-subtle comparisons to her more successful friends. What I'd interpreted as supportive partnership now revealed itself as something closer to condescending guidance. Had she ever truly seen me as an equal? Or had I always been her charity case, her fixer-upper boyfriend? The questions gnawed at me, keeping me awake night after night until exhaustion finally pulled me under, only for me to wake hours later with her voice echoing in my mind. Potential without action is worthless. 3 weeks after Olivia left, I was called into my manager's office. Phil Westbrook was a decent guy, mid-50s, balding, with the perpetually harried look of someone juggling too many responsibilities with too few resources. "Close the door, Eric," he said, not looking up from his computer. I complied, my stomach knotting with anxiety. Had my performance suffered enough to warrant a formal warning? I knew I hadn't been at my best, but I thought I'd at least been meeting minimum requirements. Phil finally looked up, his expression concerned rather than angry. "Have a seat." I sat, bracing myself. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said, leaning forward. "Your work has been slipping. Projects that used to take you 3 days are taking a week. You're not contributing in meetings. Half the time you look like you're sleepwalking." I swallowed hard. "I know. I've been going through some personal issues, but that's no excuse. I'll do better." Phil studied me for a moment. "Olivia?" The question caught me off guard. I'd mentioned Olivia at company events, but I didn't realize Phil had been paying attention. We broke up," I admitted. "She took a job in London." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry to hear that. Breakups can knock the wind out of you, especially after a long relationship." The unexpected empathy threatened to crack the fragile composure I'd been maintaining. I looked away, focusing on the family photo on his desk to keep from embarrassing myself. "I appreciate your understanding," I managed. "If you can give me a little time, I promise I'll get back on track." "That's not why I called you in here." He leaned back in his chair. "The Axion project. You know they've been one of our biggest clients for the past 2 years?" I nodded. Axion Technologies was an emerging player in enterprise software, growing rapidly and generating substantial revenue for Meridian through our inventory management implementation. Their CTO called me yesterday. Apparently, the integration report you submitted last month impressed him. He said it showed insight into their operational challenges that their own team had missed. I blinked in surprise. The Axion report had been a routine deliverable, something I'd completed shortly before Olivia dropped her London bombshell. I'd put extra effort into it, certainly, analyzing their supply chain inefficiencies and suggesting optimization strategies that went beyond our standard implementation. But I hadn't expected anyone to take special notice. "That's good to hear," I said cautiously. "More than good. They want you to lead the next phase of their implementation. A 6-month project, mostly on-site at their headquarters. It would mean a temporary promotion to senior project coordinator with corresponding pay increase." He slid a folder across the desk. "Details are in there." "It's a significant opportunity, Eric." I stared at the folder without touching it. "Why me?" "After what you just said about my recent performance, because despite your current slump, you've consistently been one of our most thorough analysts. And because sometimes the best way to move past personal problems is to throw yourself into a professional challenge." He pushed the folder closer to me. "Take it home. Review it. Let me know by Monday." I finally picked up the folder, feeling its weight, literal and figurative, in my hands. "Thank you for the opportunity. I'll think about it." As I stood to leave, Phil added, "For what it's worth, Eric, I think you have more potential than you give yourself credit for. Sometimes it takes a major life change to make us see it." His words followed me back to my cubicle, where I sat staring at the closed folder for nearly an hour. More potential than you give yourself credit for. Was that true? Or was Olivia right about me? Comfortable with mediocrity, lacking the hunger needed for real success. That night, alone in the half-empty apartment, I finally opened the folder. The project was indeed substantial. Overhauling Axion's entire inventory tracking system across 3 warehouse locations, integrating with their new enterprise resource planning software, and training their staff on the updated processes. The temporary promotion would increase my salary by 30% for the duration of the project, with the possibility of making it permanent if the implementation was successful. It would require longer hours, greater responsibility, and a level of initiative I wasn't sure I possessed. It was exactly the type of opportunity Olivia had always pushed me to pursue. I poured myself a drink. The whiskey bottle was nearly empty now, and contemplated my options. I could decline, stay in my comfort zone, and prove Olivia right about me. Or I could accept, push myself beyond my usual boundaries, and potentially fail spectacularly, also proving Olivia right about my limitations. Neither option seemed appealing when framed that way. I pulled out my phone, opened Instagram without thinking, and was immediately confronted with another Olivia update. A group photo at what appeared to be a posh London restaurant, her arm around a tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit. The caption read, "Celebrating our new partnership with Harrison Media. Exciting things ahead." Shri could have shot her power moves, shows career goals. I zoomed in on the man beside her. He looked about 40, with salt and pepper hair, and the confident smile of someone used to getting what he wanted. I didn't recognize him, but the way he leaned toward Olivia in the photo, the proprietary hand on her shoulder, told me everything I needed to know. "No one else," she'd said. "Just her career and our fundamental incompatibility." The familiar burn of betrayal rose in my throat. I closed the app and hurled my phone onto the couch, then drained my whiskey in one burning swallow. As I set the empty glass down, something shifted inside me. A strange calm settled over the chaos of emotions I'd been drowning in for weeks. In that moment of clarity, I realized I'd been asking myself the wrong question. It wasn't about proving Olivia right or wrong. It was about deciding who I wanted to be, regardless of her assessment. Did I want to remain the person she described? Comfortable, unambitious, settling for less? Or did I want to become someone else entirely? Someone even she wouldn't recognize? The answer, when framed that way, was suddenly obvious. I picked up the folder again and began reading more carefully, taking notes, considering angles that hadn't occurred to me initially. By midnight, I had filled several pages with ideas for approaching the Axion project, efficiencies that could be gained, potential challenges to address proactively, stakeholders to bring on board early. The next morning, instead of waiting until Monday, I walked straight into Phil's office and placed the folder on his desk. "I'm in," I said simply. "When do I start?" The Axion project became my salvation and my obsession. I threw myself into it with an intensity that surprised everyone, including myself. I worked 14-hour days, spent weekends researching inventory optimization techniques, and volunteered for challenges that would have terrified the old Eric. My first day on site at Axion headquarters, a sleek, modern building in the heart of the financial district, I felt like an imposter. Surrounded by confident executives in designer suits, I was acutely aware of my department store attire and middle management status. But I forced myself to stand straight, speak clearly, and project a confidence I didn't yet feel. The Axion team was initially skeptical. Most were younger than me, with prestigious degrees and the polished demeanor that comes from private education and family wealth. They reminded me of Olivia's friends, people who seemed to navigate the corporate world effortlessly, while I had to work twice as hard to keep up. But I had done my homework. When their CIO tried to derail my proposed implementation timeline in our first meeting, arguing it was too aggressive, I was ready. "I understand your concern," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "But I've analyzed your current throughput rates against industry standards." I pulled up a detailed comparison chart I'd prepared. "You're currently operating at 68% efficiency compared to similar operations. My timeline assumes we can bring that up to at least 85% within the first month, which the data indicates is achievable with the process changes outlined in Section 3. The room fell silent as the CIO studied my charts, his expression shifting from dismissive to thoughtful. "These projections are unusually detailed for a vendor presentation. I don't believe in making promises I can't quantify," I replied, surprised by the authority in my own voice. "Every timeline in my proposal is backed by specific metrics and actionable steps." He nodded slowly. "Send me your analysis. If it holds up, we'll proceed with your schedule." That small victory gave me the confidence boost I desperately needed. For the first time since Olivia left, I felt a flicker of pride in myself. Over the following weeks, I immersed myself in Axion's operations, identifying inefficiencies and implementing solutions with a determination that bordered on ruthlessness. I stayed later than anyone else, arrived before the executive team each morning, and used every minute to prove, to them and to myself, that I was capable of excellence. The project that had been allocated 6 months was completed in 4.5, with results that exceeded even my ambitious projections. Inventory accuracy improved by 32%, order fulfillment times decreased by over 40%, and the warehouse staff reported significantly higher job satisfaction due to the streamlined processes. When I presented the final results to Axion's executive team, The CEO himself, Marcus Whitman, attended. A legendary figure in the tech industry, Whitman had built Axion from a startup to a company valued at over $500 million in less than a decade. He was known for his exacting standards and brutal honesty. I was nervous, but no longer paralyzed by self-doubt. I walked them through the improvements, the ROI metrics, and the projected long-term benefits with the confidence of someone who knew their work was solid. After the presentation, as the room emptied, Whitman approached me. Up close, he was less intimidating than I'd expected. Early 50s, with kind eyes behind stylish glasses and a relaxed demeanor that belied his reputation for business ferocity. "Impressive work, Eric," he said, extending his hand. "You've saved us a considerable amount of money and time." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to work with your team." He studied me for a moment. "Phil tells me you've been with Meridian for what, 5 years now?" 5.5, I confirmed. "And this was your first project at this level?" I nodded, wondering where the conversation was heading. "Interesting." He glanced at the presentation still displayed on the screen. "You have an unusual perspective. Most consultants focus on impressing the executives. You focused on making life easier for our warehouse staff while simultaneously improving our metrics. That's rare. I hadn't thought about it that way, but he was right. Much of my implementation had centered on eliminating the frustrations reported by the people actually doing the work each day. I believe efficiency comes from the ground up," I said. "If the people doing the daily work have better tools and processes, everything else improves naturally." Whitman nodded approvingly. Smart and humble. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to me. "I'd like to continue this conversation next week. Are you available for lunch on Tuesday?" I stared at the card, embossed with the Axion logo and Whitman's name in simple, elegant font. "Yes, of course." "Good. My assistant will email you the details." He shook my hand again. "I look forward to it, Eric." As he walked away, I remained frozen, staring at the card in my hand. Had the CEO of Axion Technologies just invited me to lunch? To continue this conversation? What conversation? I tucked the card carefully into my wallet, trying not to read too much into the exchange. Probably just a courtesy, I told myself. A thank you for the project completion. But when I returned to Meridian that afternoon and told Phil about the interaction, his eyebrows shot up. "Marcus Whitman doesn't do courtesy lunches," he said, leaning forward in his chair. "If he wants to meet with you personally, it means something." "Like what?" I asked, still skeptical. Phil gave me a look that suggested I was being deliberately obtuse. "Like he might be interested in bringing you over to Axion." The possibility hadn't even occurred to me. That seems unlikely. I'm just a project coordinator. A project coordinator who just saved them millions in operational costs and completed a complex implementation in record time. Phil leaned back, shaking his head. "You really don't see it, do you?" "See what?" "How much you've changed these past few months." The Eric who walked into my office after his breakup would never have led a project like this, let alone impress someone like Whitman. He gestured to the stack of feedback forms on his desk. "Every member of the Axion team rated your performance as exceptional. Every single one." I felt a strange mix of pride and disorientation. Was it possible that in my desperate attempt to prove Olivia wrong, I had actually transformed into someone successful? "Whatever Whitman offers you," Phil continued, "I hope you'll give Meridian a chance to counter. You've become too valuable to lose without a fight. Too valuable to lose." The words echoed in my mind as I rode the subway home that evening. When was the last time anyone had made me feel valuable? Certainly not Olivia, who had seen only my shortcomings, my unrealized potential. For the first time since she left, I realized that perhaps her departure had been a twisted sort of gift. Without the comfort of her approval, which I now understood I'd never truly had, I'd been forced to find validation elsewhere. In my work, in the respect of colleagues, in my own assessment of my capabilities. The lunch with Marcus Whitman took place at an upscale restaurant with a view of the harbor. I'd spent the weekend purchasing a new suit, nothing ostentatious but significantly higher quality than anything I'd owned before, and researching Axion's recent projects and business direction so I wouldn't be caught off guard by any questions. Whitman was already seated when I arrived, casually reviewing something on his tablet. He stood to greet me, his handshake firm and welcoming. "Eric, glad you could make it. Please sit." The conversation started with easy small talk about the restaurant's acclaimed chef and Whitman's recent vacation to New Zealand. He was surprisingly down to earth, with none of the arrogance I'd expected from someone of his stature. After we ordered, however, the discussion shifted to business. "I'll get straight to the point," Whitman said, setting aside his water glass. "We're creating a new position, Director of Operational Excellence. The role would oversee all our implementation projects, with a focus on the kind of efficiency improvements you demonstrated in your work with us. I'd like you to consider taking it on." I nearly choked on my water. "I'm flattered, Mr. Whitman." "Marcus, please." "Marcus, I'm flattered, but I'm not sure I have the qualifications for a director-level position. I've never managed a team of that size or had budget responsibility at that level." He smiled slightly. "That's precisely why I'm interested in you, Eric. Most people in your position would be tripping over themselves to claim qualifications they don't have. You acknowledge the gap, which tells me you're both honest and self-aware." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "The official job description and compensation package. Take your time reviewing it. The salary is negotiable within reason, and I'm prepared to offer resources for any additional training you feel would help you succeed in the role." I opened the folder and nearly gasped at the number on the first page. The base salary was more than triple what I currently earned at Meridian. Add in the bonus structure, stock options, and benefits, and it represented a lifestyle transformation I could hardly imagine. "This is very generous." I managed, trying to maintain my composure. "It's commensurate with the value I believe you'll bring to Axion." Whitman leaned forward, his expression serious. "I don't make these offers lightly, Eric. I've built this company by recognizing potential, not just in technologies, but in people. You have a rare combination of analytical skill and emotional intelligence. You understand systems and people equally well. That's worth investing in." I stared at him, processing his words slowly. "May I ask why you're willing to take this chance on someone relatively unproven? Surely there are candidates with more experience." "Experience is overrated," he replied with a dismissive wave. "I've met countless executives with 20 years of experience who really just had the same year of experience 20 times. They never evolved, never questioned their assumptions." He pointed at the folder. "You approach problems differently. You're not constrained by how things have always been done. That's far more valuable to me than a resume full of impressive titles." Our food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. As we ate, I found myself imagining what accepting this offer would mean. Not just financially, but in terms of my identity, my sense of self-worth. "I should mention," Whitman continued after a while, "that we're expanding rapidly. This role has significant growth potential. If you perform as I expect you will, there could be a VP position in your future within a few years." I set down my fork, suddenly overwhelmed by the trajectory he was describing. From passed-over project coordinator to potential executive in the span of a few years, it seemed impossible. Yet the evidence of my recent success was undeniable. I had proven to Axion, to Meridian, and most importantly to myself, that I was capable of far more than I had allowed myself to believe. "I'll need some time to consider the offer," I said finally. "And I should give Meridian the professional courtesy of a chance to respond." Whitman nodded approvingly. "Of course. Take a week. But Eric," he added, his gaze direct, "don't undervalue yourself in the negotiation. You've earned a seat at this table." As we finished our meal, the conversation shifted to Axion's vision for the future and the role Whitman envisioned for me within it. With each passing minute, I found myself more excited by the possibilities, more confident that I could rise to the challenge he was presenting. By the time we shook hands and parted ways, I had already made my decision, though I maintained the pretense of needing time to consider. The truth was, I couldn't imagine turning down this opportunity, not just for the money or title, but for the chance to reinvent myself completely. Phil was disappointed but unsurprised when I told him about Axion's offer. Meridian made a counteroffer, as he'd promised, but it fell well short of Whitman's proposal, both financially and in terms of advancement potential. "Can't blame you for taking it," Phil said when I submitted my resignation, "but we'll miss you around here, Eric. You've really stepped up these past few months." "I appreciate everything you've done for me," I replied sincerely, "especially giving me the chance with the Axion project when I was at my lowest." He smiled sadly. "Sometimes people need to be pushed into the deep end to discover they could swim all along." My last day at Meridian was bittersweet. Colleagues I'd worked alongside for years organized a small going-away happy hour. There were genuine expressions of congratulations mixed with good-natured jokes about me moving up to the big leagues, and not forgetting the little people. It struck me then how much I'd changed. 6 months earlier, I would have downplayed the achievement, deflected the praise, and generally minimized my success to avoid seeming boastful. Now I accepted their congratulations with simple gratitude and quiet confidence. That night, alone in my apartment, I'd finally moved to a nicer place with a view of the park. I found myself thinking about Olivia for the first time in weeks. I realized with mild surprise that the sharp pain of her rejection had dulled to a distant ache. In its place was something unexpected: gratitude. Her cruel assessment had been the catalyst for this transformation. Without her walking away, without those brutal words about my mediocrity, would I have found the motivation to prove her wrong? Would I have pushed myself beyond my comfortable limitations? I opened my laptop and, against my better judgment, navigated to her Instagram profile. Her post showed a glamorous life in London, parties with celebrities, working dinners with important clients, weekends in Paris and Barcelona. She looked happy, successful, exactly as I'd always known she would be. But instead of the familiar stab of inadequacy, I felt oddly detached. Her life, which once seemed so intertwined with mine, now existed in a parallel universe that no longer affected me. I closed the laptop without commenting or liking any photos. Some chapters were better left ended. Currently, my first day at Axion arrived with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. The human resources director met me in the lobby, presenting me with a security badge that granted access to the executive floor, a tangible symbol of my new status. My office, an actual office with a door, not a cubicle, overlooked the city skyline. My name was already on the door: Eric Caldwell, Director of Operational Excellence. Seeing it printed there, official and permanent, sent a strange thrill through me. The adjustment wasn't seamless. Leading a team of 15 professionals, many with advanced degrees and specialized expertise, proved challenging. There were moments of imposter syndrome so intense I had to lock my office door and take deep breaths to calm the panic. There were mistakes: an early project timeline that proved too aggressive, a hire that didn't work out, a presentation to the board that I overprepared for to the point of sounding robotic. But Whitman proved to be the mentor I never knew I needed. He didn't coddle me through the learning curve, but provided direct, constructive feedback that helped me grow into the role. When I succeeded, his praise was genuine but measured. When I fell short, his criticism was precise but never demoralizing. Leadership isn't about knowing everything, he told me after I'd struggled to answer a technical question in a department meeting. It's about knowing who knows and creating an environment where they can apply that knowledge effectively. I absorbed his wisdom like a sponge, gradually developing my own leadership style, one that combined my natural empathy with my newly discovered capacity for decisive action. 6 months into my role at Axion, I had established myself as a respected member of the leadership team. My department had successfully implemented efficiency improvements across 3 major business units, resulting in cost savings that more than justified my generous salary. I had built a reputation for fairness, thoroughness, and the ability to translate complex technical challenges into straightforward business solutions. I had also changed physically. Regular sessions with a personal trainer, an expense that would have seemed frivolous to the old Eric, had transformed my formerly soft physique into something leaner and more defined. A stylish haircut, designer glasses, and a wardrobe overhaul completed the transformation. Sometimes, catching my reflection in the mirrored walls of the Axion lobby, I barely recognized myself. Not just the external changes, but the way I carried myself. Shoulders back, gaze direct, movements purposeful. I had become in every measurable way successful. The kind of man Olivia might have deemed worthy of her. The irony wasn't lost on me. It was around this time that Whitman called me into his office late one Friday afternoon. His assistant had marked the meeting as confidential on my calendar, piquing my curiosity. "Close the door, Eric," he said when I entered, reminiscent of that long-ago meeting with Phil that had set this journey in motion. "I have something significant to discuss with you." I sat across from him, mentally reviewing recent projects for anything that might have caused concern. "Is everything all right?" "Better than all right," he smiled, sliding a document across his desk. "We're acquiring Prism Media." I froze, the name instantly sending a jolt through my system. Prism Media, Olivia's company. "The London-based advertising firm?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Whitman nodded, either not noticing or choosing to ignore my sudden tension. "They've built an impressive digital marketing division that complements our enterprise offerings perfectly. The deal is nearly finalized, just waiting on board approval next week." I stared at the document, a high-level overview of the acquisition strategy. My mind was racing, connecting dots that Whitman couldn't possibly know existed. "We'll be consolidating their operations into our North American headquarters. He continued. Their CEO will stay on through the transition, but most of their executive team will be evaluated for fit within our organization structure. Evaluated for fit, a euphemism for potential redundancies. And what does this have to do with me? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. You've proven your ability to optimize operations and identify efficiencies. He leaned forward, enthusiasm evident in his expression. I want you to lead the integration team. Evaluate their processes, their personnel, their systems. Determine what stays, what goes, and how we merge everything into Axion's ecosystem most effectively. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. After everything, the heartbreak, the rebuilding, the reinvention, fate was delivering Olivia Bennett back into my orbit. And not as an equal, but as someone whose professional future would potentially be determined by my assessment. The London office too? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Eventually, yes. We'll start with their New York operations, then tackle London in phase 2. You'll need to spend time in both locations. Whitman was already moving on, outlining the integration timeline and objectives. I nodded mechanically, processing the implications. Would Olivia even recognize me now? Would she make the connection between the awkward, unambitious boyfriend she discarded and the executive sitting across the table during integration meetings? And more importantly, what would I do if she did? This is a high-visibility assignment. Whitman was saying, success here could fast-track you to that VP position we discussed. I refocused on the conversation, pushing thoughts of Olivia to a compartment in my mind I could examine later. I appreciate your confidence in me. When would this start? We announced the acquisition next Monday. I'd like you to fly to New York the following week to begin preliminary assessments. I nodded, projecting a calm I didn't feel. I'll clear my calendar. As I left Whitman's office, a strange sensation settled over me. Part dread, part anticipation, part something darker that I wasn't entirely comfortable acknowledging. The possibility of coming face-to-face with Olivia after all this time, after all my changes, awakened feelings I thought I'd put to rest. Not love. That had died a painful death in our half-empty apartment over a year ago. No, what stirred now was something more complicated. A desire for recognition. For her to see what she'd discarded. For her to realize how catastrophically wrong her assessment of me had been. It was, I recognized with uncomfortable clarity, a desire for vindication. Perhaps even revenge. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, mind racing with scenarios, contingency plans, potential approaches. Should I recuse myself from the acquisition team, citing a conflict of interest? Should I proceed normally and pretend not to recognize her if our paths crossed? Should I explicitly request to evaluate the London office personnel, ensuring a direct confrontation? By morning, I had made my decision. I would neither avoid nor seek out Olivia. I would simply do the job Whitman had entrusted to me with the same thoroughness and fairness I applied to every assignment. If our paths crossed in the process, so be it. But as I showered and dressed for my Saturday morning run, I couldn't suppress a small, vindictive thrill at the prospect of Olivia Bennett discovering that the boyfriend she'd deemed mediocre and unambitious now held significant influence over her professional future. Success, as they say, is the best revenge. But having the power to directly impact her career, that was a level of poetic justice I could never have anticipated. The acquisition of Prism Media was announced the following Monday, with the usual corporate fanfare. Press releases highlighting synergies and growth opportunities, carefully crafted emails to employees of both companies, promising exciting new chapters while glossing over the inevitable disruptions to come. I spent the week preparing for my role in the integration, studying Prism's organizational structure, financial reports, and client portfolios. Through this research, I confirmed what I had suspected. Olivia had indeed risen through the ranks in London, now holding the title of Senior Brand Director for European Operations, a role that, under the new combined organization, would overlap significantly with Axion's existing European marketing leadership. In corporate acquisition language, that spelled redundancy. I told myself I felt nothing about this discovery, neither satisfaction nor concern. I was simply noting a business reality that would need to be addressed during the integration process. The following Tuesday, I flew to New York for the initial meetings with Prism's executive team. Their offices occupied 3 floors of a sleek midtown tower, all glass and chrome and designer furniture. Much like Olivia herself, beautiful but with a certain coldness beneath the polished exterior. Prism's CEO, Richard Harmon, met me in the reception area. A tall man with silver hair and the confident demeanor of someone used to commanding rooms, he greeted me with professional courtesy, tinged with the wariness of a leader whose company was being absorbed by a larger entity. Mr. Caldwell, welcome to Prism. I understand you'll be leading the integration efforts. Please call me Eric, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. And yes, I'll be working closely with your team to ensure a smooth transition. He nodded, gesturing toward a conference room. We've gathered the key department heads as requested. Some of our European leadership has flown in as well, so you'll have a comprehensive view of our operations. My heart skipped a beat. European leadership. Would Olivia be among them? I appreciate that, I said, keeping my voice steady. The more information we can gather early, the more seamless the integration will be. The conference room was already filled with about 15 people, all in various states of barely concealed anxiety. I recognized the universal expressions of employees facing an acquisition. Forced smiles masking fear for their positions, slightly too eager responses designed to demonstrate value, sidelong glances exchanging unspoken concerns. I scanned the faces quickly, feeling a mix of relief and disappointment when I didn't see Olivia among them. Of course, she would likely be part of the London meeting scheduled for the following month. For the next 3 days, I conducted interviews, reviewed processes, and began mapping out the integration plan. The work was complex but engaging, requiring all my focus and analytical skills. I found myself genuinely impressed with many aspects of Prism's operation, particularly their creative development process and client management systems. By Thursday afternoon, I had completed most of my scheduled assessments and was preparing to return to Axion headquarters the next day. I was reviewing notes in the small office Prism had provided for my use when there was a knock at the door. Come in, I called, not looking up from my laptop. Eric Caldwell. The voice froze me in place. Familiar yet different. The same cultured tones, but with a slight British inflection, now coloring the words. Slowly, I raised my head to meet Olivia Bennett's gaze for the first time in nearly 2 years. She stood in the doorway, as beautiful as ever, in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe had before my transformation. Her chestnut hair was shorter now, falling in a sleek bob just above her shoulders. She looked polished, successful, exactly as I'd imagined she would. What I hadn't imagined was the shock that registered on her face as she recognized me. Eric. Disbelief colored her voice. Is that really you? I stood, smoothing my custom-tailored suit jacket. A small, petty gesture that nevertheless gave me a moment to compose myself. Hello, Olivia. This is unexpected. I thought you were based in London. She stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. Her eyes traveled over me, taking in the changes. The fit physique, the designer clothes, the confident posture. I flew in for the acquisition meetings. She seemed to be struggling to reconcile the man before her with the memory of who I had been. They said Axion's director of operations would be leading the integration, but I never imagined. How did you end up here? I finished for her, allowing myself a small smile. A lot has changed since London. Clearly, she was still staring, her composure, usually so unshakable, visibly disturbed. You look different. People change. I replied simply, sitting back down and gesturing to the chair across from my desk. Did you need something specific? I have a flight back to headquarters tomorrow morning. The casual dismissiveness in my tone wasn't planned, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction it gave me to see her momentarily flustered. This woman, who had once looked down on me with such certainty about my limitations, was now struggling to process the evidence of how wrong she had been. She hesitated, then took the offered seat, crossing her legs and attempting to regain her usual poise. I wanted to introduce myself to the integration lead. I didn't realize it would be a reunion of sorts. Hardly a reunion, I said coolly. More of a professional coincidence. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Right. Professional. She glanced around the office, then back at me. So you're really a director at Axion now? That's quite a leap from where you were. The implied question, how did someone like you achieve something like this, hung in the air between us. Marcus Whitman believes in recognizing and developing talent. I replied, deliberately using the CEO's first name. He recruited me personally after I led a successful implementation project for Axion while I was still at Meridian. Marcus, she repeated, noting the familiarity. You must have impressed him. Apparently so. I leaned back slightly. But we should focus on the matter at hand. I understand you're senior brand director for European operations. She straightened, shifting into professional mode. Yes, I've been overseeing all our European accounts for the past 18 months. We've increased market share by 22% and brought on 3 major new clients. I nodded, making a show of typing notes on my laptop. Impressive. Though there's significant overlap with Axion's existing European marketing structure, Jason Reynolds is our VP of International Marketing Operations, with regional directors in London, Paris, and Berlin. The implication wasn't subtle. In any acquisition, overlapping roles meant consolidation, and usually the acquiring company's leadership remained, while the acquired company's parallel positions were eliminated. Olivia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm sure we can find ways to integrate the teams effectively. My knowledge of the European luxury market is unparalleled in the industry. I'll certainly take that into consideration during my assessment, I replied, my tone making it clear that her future at the combined company would indeed be my decision to make. The power dynamic that had once defined our relationship, her as the successful, ambitious one looking down on my modest career, had completely reversed. Now I was the one with authority, with the capacity to shape her professional future. The irony was exquisite. She must have sensed it too, because something flickered across her face. Recognition, perhaps, of the precariousness of her position. I'd be happy to walk you through my team's performance metrics, she offered, her voice taking on a slightly warmer tone. Perhaps over dinner? We could catch up properly. The suggestion, with its thinly veiled attempt to establish a personal connection that might influence my professional assessment, was so transparent that I nearly laughed. Instead, I kept my expression neutral as I closed my laptop. That won't be necessary. I have all the data I need from the reports you've submitted. I stood, signaling that our conversation was ending. If I have additional questions, I'll be in London next month for phase 2 of the integration planning. She rose as well, smoothing her skirt in a gesture I recognized from our time together. A nervous habit she resorted to when things weren't going her way. Of course, she hesitated, then added, "It really is remarkable seeing you like this. I never would have expected that I'd amount to anything worthwhile." I finished for her, finally allowing a hint of the old pain to surface. "Yes, I recall your assessment of my potential quite clearly." Color rose in her cheeks. "That's not what It's exactly what you meant," I interrupted, my voice low but firm. "And you were wrong, Olivia, about a lot of things." We stood there for a moment, the weight of our shared history and the stark reality of our reverse circumstances hanging in the air between us. Finally, she nodded slightly. "It appears I should go. My flight back to London leaves in a few hours." "Safe travels," I said formally, as if we were nothing more than business acquaintances. "I'll see you in London next month." As she turned to leave, she paused with her hand on the doorknob. "For what it's worth, Eric, you look happy. Success suits you." The door closed behind her before I could respond, which was probably for the best. Because the truth was complicated. Was I happy? In many ways, yes. I had achieved more than I'd ever thought possible. Proven my worth to myself and the world. Built a life that brought me satisfaction and pride. But happy? That suggested a lightness, a freedom from the past that I wasn't sure I'd achieved. Because sitting there in that borrowed office, having just experienced the confrontation I'd privately rehearsed 100 times, I discovered something unexpected. The vindication I'd craved felt hollow. Seeing the shock on Olivia's face, watching her struggle to reconcile the man before her with the one she dismissed so completely, it should have been triumphant. Instead, it left me feeling strangely empty. As if in continuing to measure my success against her reaction, I was still giving her power over my self-worth. I gathered my papers slowly, troubled by this realization. Then I remembered something Whitman had said to me during one of our mentoring sessions. True success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Had I really been building this new life for myself? Or had I been constructing an elaborate revenge fantasy, designing every achievement as a weapon to wield against Olivia's memory? The question haunted me on the flight back to headquarters the next day. I reviewed my integration notes mechanically, my mind elsewhere, replaying not just the encounter with Olivia, but the entire journey that had led me to this point. When had my motivation shifted from proving her wrong to actually enjoying my own capabilities? At what point had I started pursuing excellence for its own sake, rather than as a response to her rejection? I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, but I knew it had happened. The satisfaction I felt in solving complex operational challenges, in mentoring my team members, in earning Whitman's respect, none of that had anything to do with Olivia. It was genuine, intrinsic reward that had become disconnected from its original catalyst. Yet now, with her sudden reappearance, I found myself at a crossroads. The professional path forward was clear. Continue the integration assessment, evaluate all personnel objectively, make recommendations based on business needs rather than personal history. But emotionally, that was murkier territory. Part of me, a part I wasn't particularly proud of, wanted to use my position to ensure Olivia's role was eliminated in the restructuring. A neat professional form of revenge that would mirror her prediction back on her. She would be the one going nowhere, not me. Another part recognized that such an action would diminish all I had worked to become. Using power to settle personal scores was exactly the kind of behavior I disdained in others throughout my career. By the time the plane landed, I had reached no resolution. I decided to set the question aside and focus on the more immediate tasks at hand. The London phase of the integration was still weeks away. I had time to determine the most appropriate course of action. What I didn't have, as it turned out, was time to prepare for Olivia's next move. The Monday following my return to headquarters, my assistant knocked on my office door shortly after lunch. "Mr. Caldwell, there's an Olivia Bennett here to see you. She says she has an appointment, but I don't see anything on your calendar." I froze, coffee cup halfway to my lips. "Olivia Bennett is here? Now?" "Yes, sir. She said she flew in specifically to meet with you about the integration." I set down my cup carefully, mind racing. What was she playing at? The London meetings weren't scheduled for another 3 weeks. "Show her in," I said finally, straightening papers on my desk more for something to do with my hands than out of any real need for organization. Moments later, Olivia walked through my door, as impeccably put together as she had been in New York, but with a determined set to her jaw that I recognized from our past. When she wanted something, truly wanted it, that expression appeared, a combination of focus and preparation that had always been formidable. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment," she said as my assistant closed the door behind her. "I apologize for the surprise visit. It's certainly unexpected," I replied, gesturing for her to take a seat, "especially since we're scheduled to meet in London at the end of the month." She sat, smoothing her skirt in that familiar nervous gesture. I felt we needed to clear the air privately before the formal integration meetings. I raised an eyebrow. "Clear the air? About our history?" She met my gaze directly. "And how it might affect your assessment of Prism's European operations?" At least she wasn't pretending this was purely professional. "I assure you, all my recommendations will be based on business considerations, not personal history." "Will they?" she challenged softly. "Because based on our conversation in New York, I'm not convinced you fully processed what happened between us." I felt a flare of anger at her presumption. "I've processed it quite thoroughly, thank you. It's been nearly 2 years, and in those 2 years, you've completely transformed your career, coincidentally in exactly the direction I suggested you should." She leaned forward slightly. "That doesn't strike you as possibly being connected?" The observation was uncomfortably perceptive. "My career path is my own," I said stiffly. "Your opinion ceased to be relevant the moment you walked out." "Did it?" She tilted her head slightly. "Because it seems to me that everything you've done since then has been a response to what I said that night." I stood abruptly, unable to remain seated under her analytical gaze. "You don't get to take credit for my success, Olivia. You didn't believe in me then, and you don't get to claim you somehow inspired me now. That's not what I'm saying." Her voice remained calm, which somehow irritated me further. "I'm acknowledging that I hurt you deeply, that my assessment of your potential was not just wrong, but harmful, and that it appears to have driven you to prove me wrong in the most dramatic way possible." I turned to look out the window, unwilling to let her see the effect her words were having. Outside, the city sprawled beneath a clear blue sky, unaware of the emotional turbulence in this glass-walled office. "Why are you really here?" I asked finally. "To apologize? To ensure I don't use my position to exact revenge? To remind me that your performance metrics are excellent and should be considered objectively?" "All of the above," she admitted. "Plus one more thing." I turned back to face her. "Which is to tell you that I've been watching your rise at Axion with interest ever since I learned of the acquisition." She stood as well, reducing the physical power differential between us. "You've become exactly the kind of executive I always believed you could be. The potential was always there, Eric. I just couldn't figure out how to help you see it in yourself." The statement was so audacious, so perfectly Olivia in its self-serving reframing of events, that I actually laughed. "Is that how you're choosing to remember it? That you were trying to help me reach my potential?" I shook my head in disbelief. "You called me mediocre. You said I lacked ambition and intelligence. You walked out because I wasn't successful enough for you. I walked out because we wanted different things, she countered. And yes, I said terrible, hurtful things that I regret. But tell me honestly, if I hadn't, would you be standing in this office right now? Would you have pushed yourself to become this version of yourself? The question struck too close to the doubts I'd been wrestling with myself. I turned away again, unwilling to engage with her rewriting of our history. What do you want from me, Olivia? A thank you note for breaking my heart? Assurance that your job is safe despite the obvious redundancies in our organizational structure? What? I want you to acknowledge that what's happening between us isn't just business, she said quietly. That your assessment of my role in the new organization might be colored by our past, just as my reaction to seeing you again is complicated by it. I turned back slowly. And what exactly is your reaction to seeing me again? Something shifted in her expression. A vulnerability I rarely saw during our relationship. Regret. Pride, strangely enough. Attraction, if I'm being completely honest. She shrugged slightly. You've become exactly the kind of man I always found compelling. Confident, successful, with a clear sense of purpose. The admission hung in the air between us, unexpected and unsettling. Was she actually suggesting, if this is some kind of manipulation to protect your position? I began. It's not, she interrupted. My professional track record speaks for itself. I excel at what I do, and any objective assessment would recognize that. Then what is this? I gestured between us. Because it sounds suspiciously like you're expressing interest in someone you once deemed unworthy of your time. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I'm expressing that people change, that situations evolve, that the chemistry we once had might still exist in this new context. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. The sheer audacity of it, to walk back into my life and suggest that now that I met her standards of success, perhaps we should reconsider our relationship. Let me be perfectly clear, I said, my voice low and controlled. There is no us to reconsider. That chapter ended the moment you decided I wasn't good enough for you. Whatever I've become since then, I've become for myself, not to meet your approval metrics. Her face flushed slightly. That's not what It's exactly what you're doing. I cut her off. You're looking at me now, successful, confident, in a position of power, and recalculating my worth based on the very criteria you used to dismiss me. And that confirms everything I needed to know about your character. She took a step back, visibly stung by my assessment. That's unfair. People are allowed to reassess situations, to acknowledge mistakes. Yes, they are, I agreed. But this isn't about acknowledging mistakes. This is about you realizing that I now have something you want, both professionally in terms of influence over your career, and personally in terms of the success and status you've always valued. You're oversimplifying a complex situation, she protested. Am I? I moved closer, close enough to catch the familiar scent of her perfume. Still the same expensive brand she'd always worn. Tell me something, Olivia. If I had walked into your office as the same Eric you left, a bit overweight, modestly employed, with no impressive title or salary, would you be expressing this renewed interest? This recognition of chemistry between us? She hesitated just a fraction too long before answering. People are attracted to confidence, to success. That's human nature. No, I corrected her. That's your nature. And it's exactly why we would never work, regardless of who I've become. I walked to my office door and opened it, a clear signal that our conversation was ending. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do. The formal integration meetings in London will proceed as scheduled. Your role will be evaluated based on business requirements and your professional qualifications. Nothing more. She gathered her purse, her composure visibly ruffled. This isn't how I hoped this conversation would go. I'm sure it isn't, I replied evenly. But contrary to what you might still believe, not everything unfolds according to your expectations. As she passed me to exit, she paused briefly. For what it's worth, I am genuinely sorry for how I hurt you. Whatever you believe about my motives now, I never intended to cause you pain. I looked at her directly, seeing not just the polished executive before me, but the shadows of our shared past. Intent rarely matters as much as impact, Olivia. That's something I've learned in my new role. Now safe travels back to London. After she left, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at nothing in particular, processing the unexpected encounter. Her appearance, her implied suggestion that we might reconnect romantically now that I met her standards of success, it should have been gratifying in a way. Vindication in its purest form. Instead, it crystallized something I'd been circling around since our New York meeting. I was finally truly over Olivia Bennett. Not just over the pain she'd caused, but over the need for her validation or recognition. Over measuring my worth against her assessment. Over allowing her opinion, past or present, to influence my choices. The realization brought with it a profound sense of freedom. For nearly 2 years, my transformation had been at least partially driven by the desire to prove her wrong. But sitting there in my office, I understood that I no longer cared whether she thought I was successful or not. I knew I was. I was proud of what I'd built, who I'd become, and none of it had anything to do with her anymore. With this clarity came a decision about how to handle the Prism integration. I would do exactly what I told her I would. Evaluate every position, including hers, based solely on business needs and professional qualifications. Not to prove I was above petty revenge, though I was, but because that was the right approach for Axion, for our shareholders, and for my own integrity. Over the next 3 weeks, I immersed myself in the integration planning, crafting a structure that would maximize the strengths of both organizations while eliminating redundancies. Whitman reviewed my recommendations, made a few adjustments, and gave his approval for the London meetings. "This is thorough work, Eric," he said, closing the presentation deck, "particularly the European operations model. You found efficiencies I didn't see." "Thank you," I replied. "It's a complex market, but I think this structure gives us the best of both worlds." He nodded, studying me for a moment. "I understand Olivia Bennett came to see you a few weeks ago." I blinked in surprise. "She did? How did you—" "Small world," he said with a slight smile. "I had dinner with Richard Harmon last week. He mentioned that his London director had made a special trip to meet with you." He raised an eyebrow. "Any particular reason why that meeting couldn't wait for the London sessions?" I considered deflecting, but opted for a limited version of the truth. "We have some history." She wanted to ensure it wouldn't affect my assessment of her department. "History?" Whitman repeated, his expression suggesting he understood exactly what kind. "And will it?" "No," I said firmly. "My recommendations are based entirely on business requirements and performance metrics." He nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good. Because her numbers are impressive. I'd have questioned any recommendation to eliminate her role without very solid justification. My proposal maintains her position," I confirmed, though with a slight restructuring of responsibilities to reduce overlap with our existing European marketing leadership. Whitman smiled. "Perfect. That's exactly the kind of nuanced approach I was hoping for." He stood, signaling the end of our meeting. "I look forward to seeing this implemented. The London meeting should be interesting." Interesting indeed, I thought as I gathered my materials, but not for the reasons he might imagine. The following Monday, I flew to London for the second phase of the integration planning. The Prism Media London offices were located in a converted warehouse in Shoreditch, all exposed brick, industrial lighting, and open concept workspaces. It had the carefully curated, creative aesthetic that advertising agencies seem to favor, a stark contrast to Axion's more traditional corporate environment. Olivia was waiting in the reception area when I arrived, professional and composed, as if our uncomfortable conversation in my office had never happened. "Welcome to London," she said, extending her hand formally. "I hope your flight was comfortable." "It was, thank you," I replied, keeping my tone equally professional as I shook her hand. "I'm looking forward to meeting your team." She nodded, gesturing toward a hallway. "They're gathered in the main conference room. I've prepared detailed overviews of each department's operations and performance metrics, as requested." As we walked, I noted how effortlessly she had shifted back into her corporate persona. Efficient, focused, devoid of the emotional undertones that had characterized our last meeting. I found myself appreciating her professionalism, her ability to compartmentalize for the sake of the work at hand. The next 3 days were filled with presentations, interviews, and detailed discussions about how to merge Prism's European operations with Axion's existing structure. I observed Olivia in her element, commanding, insightful, clearly respected by her team. Whatever personal history existed between us, her professional capabilities were undeniable. On the final day, I presented my proposed organizational structure to Prism's European leadership team. As I outlined the changes, I could see Olivia following along carefully, her expression revealing nothing as I came to her department. "Brand strategy will maintain its current structure with some expanded responsibilities," I explained, displaying the relevant slide. "Ms. Bennett will continue as senior director, adding oversight of digital content development across all European markets while transferring commodities sector client management to our Berlin office. The slight widening of her eyes was the only indication of her surprise. She had clearly expected a demotion or lateral move at best, not an expansion of her role. After the presentation, as the room cleared, she approached me. "I have to admit, that's not what I expected." "It's what makes the most business sense," I replied simply. "Your team's performance in the luxury and financial sectors has been exceptional. It would be foolish to disrupt that momentum." She studied me for a moment. "Thank you for your objectivity. I told you I would be professional." I gathered my papers, preparing to leave. "The transition should be smooth. You'll report to Jason Reynolds initially, but he'll be hands-off on the day-to-day operations." She nodded, then hesitated. "I'm having a small gathering at my flat tonight. Just a few colleagues to mark the end of this chapter and the beginning of the next. Would you consider attending?" As the integration lead, it would be a gesture of goodwill toward the team. I considered declining, but realized there was no valid professional reason to do so. And personally, I no longer felt the need to avoid her. "At what time?" I asked. 8 o'clock. "I can text you the address." I nodded. "I'll be there." Briefly, her smile seemed genuine. "Excellent. It's casual, no need for a suit." That evening, I took a taxi to the address she'd provided, a converted loft in a trendy area of East London. The space was impressive: high ceilings, designer furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. It suited her perfectly. About 20 people were already there when I arrived, mingling with drinks in hand, the atmosphere relaxed and convivial. Olivia spotted me immediately, making her way through the crowd to greet me. "Eric, you made it." She handed me a glass of what appeared to be very expensive scotch. "I remember this was your preferred drink." The gesture, remembering such a detail after all this time, caught me slightly off guard. "Thank you. Nice place." "Thanks. I found it about a year ago." The light sold me, perfect for my photography hobby. I raised an eyebrow. "You take photographs now?" She smiled, seeming pleased that I'd engaged. "I dabble. Mostly architectural subjects, some street photography. London's been inspiring that way." She led me around, making introductions to her colleagues, many of whom expressed enthusiasm about the acquisition and the expanded opportunities it might bring. I found myself relaxing slightly, engaging in conversations about the London creative scene and the differences between American and European marketing approaches. As the evening progressed, the crowd gradually thinned until only a handful of people remained. Olivia approached me as I was preparing to leave. "Would you mind staying a few more minutes?" she asked. "There's something I'd like to show you." Curiosity got the better of me. "All right." After saying goodbye to the last few departing guests, she led me to a small home office adjacent to the living area. One wall was covered with framed photographs, striking black and white images of London architecture, candid street scenes, abstract compositions of light and shadow. "These are yours?" I asked, genuinely impressed. "They're quite good. Thank you." She stood beside me, studying the images. It started as a way to fill weekends in a new city where I knew almost no one. Then it became something more. Therapeutic, I suppose. I glanced at her. "Therapeutic?" She nodded, moving to a small bar cart in the corner and refreshing our drinks. Moving to London wasn't the fresh start I imagined it would be. The job was challenging in all the right ways, but outside of work, she shrugged. It was lonelier than I expected. "You seem to have made friends," I observed, gesturing toward the now empty living room where her colleagues had been. "Colleagues, mostly. It's not the same." She handed me my refreshed drink. "I've done a lot of thinking since moving here, about what I really want, about the choices I've made." I took the drink but maintained my distance, wary of where this conversation might be heading. "That sounds like a natural part of any major life transition." "It is." She moved to a desk and picked up a leather-bound journal. "I've been writing too, trying to make sense of things. Patterns in my relationships, my career choices." She looked up at me. "Do you know what I realized?" I took a sip of my scotch, buying time. "What's that?" "That I've been chasing external validation my entire life. My parents' approval through academic achievement, my peers' envy through career advancement, my partner's admiration through success and status." She set the journal down. "Always measuring my worth through others' perceptions." The self-awareness was surprising. The Olivia I had known rarely engaged in this kind of introspection. "That's a significant realization," I said neutrally. "It is, and it helped me understand what happened with us." She leaned against the desk. "I didn't leave because you weren't ambitious enough, Eric. I left because your contentment threatened my entire value system." If you could be happy without constantly climbing, constantly achieving, what did that say about my relentless pursuit of status and recognition? I stared at her, processing this unexpected perspective. That's not how it seemed at the time. Of course not. I couldn't articulate it then, even to myself. She took a drink, then continued. It was easier to frame you as lacking something than to consider that I might be chasing the wrong things. The words hung in the air between us, honest in a way Olivia had rarely been during our relationship. I found myself unsure how to respond. This wasn't the conversation I had anticipated when agreeing to stay. Why are you telling me this now? I finally asked. Because I owe you the truth. And because seeing you again, seeing how you've transformed your life on your own terms, made me realize how unfair my assessment of you was. She moved slightly closer. You've become successful, but you've done it without becoming cold or cutthroat. You've maintained your fundamental decency while achieving everything I claimed you couldn't. I set my glass down, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Olivia, I'm not trying to rekindle anything, she said quickly, reading my discomfort. I know that bridge is thoroughly burned. I just wanted you to know that I recognize how wrong I was. About you. About what matters. She smiled sadly. Ironically, you've achieved everything I thought I wanted in a partner. But in the process of getting there, you've outgrown any need for me. The assessment was surprisingly accurate. I had outgrown her. Not just the relationship, but the need for her approval that had once been so central to my self-image. I appreciate your honesty, I said finally, and I'm glad you found some perspective that brings you peace. She nodded, accepting the diplomatic response for what it was. Acknowledgement without engagement. You're heading back tomorrow? She asked, shifting to safer territory. Yes, morning flight. The integration will proceed according to the timeline we discussed today. Your team should receive formal transition documents next week. And then you'll be my boss's boss, she said with a slight smile. Life takes unexpected turns. That it does. I finished my drink and set the glass down. I should go. It's getting late and I have an early flight. She walked me to the door, maintaining a respectful distance. Thank you for coming tonight and for your fairness throughout this process. I'm just doing my job, I replied, though we both knew it had been more complicated than that. As I stepped into the hallway, she said, For what it's worth, Eric, I'm genuinely happy for your success. Not because it validates anything I believed about potential or ambition, but because you deserve it. I looked at her for a long moment, seeing not just the polished executive or the ex-girlfriend who had broken my heart, but a complex person who, like me, was still figuring things out. Thank you, I said simply. Good night, Olivia. Good night, Eric. The door closed softly behind me, and I walked to the elevator feeling strangely unburdened. Our conversation hadn't gone at all as I might have expected, had contained none of the vindictive satisfaction I might once have craved. Instead, it had offered something I hadn't realized I still needed. Closure. As I stepped out into the cool London night, flagging a taxi back to my hotel, I realized that the journey that had begun with Olivia's cruel words about my potential had come full circle. I had indeed transformed, had indeed achieved success beyond what either of us might have imagined possible. But the most important transformation had nothing to do with my title, salary, or influence. It was internal, a fundamental shift in how I valued myself, independent of anyone else's assessment. I had become my own measure of success. And in doing so, I had finally truly moved beyond the pain of her rejection. The taxi pulled away from the curb, carrying me back toward my hotel and the early flight that would return me to my new life. A life I had built not out of spite or the need for revenge, but out of the discovery of my own capabilities and worth. In the end, the most satisfying aspect of becoming Olivia's boss wasn't the power it gave me over her career. It was the realization that I no longer needed that power to feel whole. Sometimes the best revenge isn't making someone pay for how they hurt you. It's reaching a place where their opinion no longer has the power to hurt you at all. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months, free from the last lingering ghosts of what had once been my greatest heartbreak. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new ways to test my capabilities, and expand my vision of what was possible. And for the first time since that April evening, when Olivia had walked out of my life, I was facing the future unburdened by the past, motivated not by the desire to prove someone wrong, but by the excitement of discovering just how right I could be about my own potential. The integration of Prism Media into Axion Technologies proceeded smoothly over the following months. My recommendations were implemented with minimal disruption, and the combined company quickly began to realize the synergies we had projected. Olivia performed well in her expanded role, maintaining a strictly professional relationship with me during our occasional interactions at global leadership meetings. 6 months after the acquisition was completed, Marcus Whitman called me into his office on a Friday afternoon. He was smiling as I entered, which immediately put me at ease. "Take a seat, Eric. I've got some news you'll want to hear." I sat, curious. "What's up?" "The board just approved a new executive structure for next year." He leaned forward, clearly pleased with himself, including the creation of a new position, Executive Vice President of Global Operations. My heart rate picked up slightly. "That sounds like a significant expansion of our leadership team." "It is, and I want you to take the role." He slid a folder across the desk, reminiscent of how this journey had begun years earlier with Phil's folder containing the Axion project details. Effective January 1st. It's a substantial promotion, reporting directly to me, with global responsibility for all operational aspects of the business. I opened the folder, momentarily stunned by the compensation package outlined on the first page. It represented another quantum leap in my career trajectory, placing me firmly in the executive ranks with equity participation and board exposure. "This is unexpected," I managed. Whitman laughed. "Is it really? You've consistently delivered exceptional results. The Prism integration alone saved us millions in projected costs while actually improving performance metrics across both organizations. That doesn't happen by accident." I scanned the role description, taking in the scope of responsibilities. "This is a tremendous opportunity. Thank you for your confidence in me. You've earned it." He leaned back in his chair. "I told you when we first met that I saw something special in your approach. You've proven me right at every turn." As I left his office, folder in hand containing the details of my new position, I was struck by a profound sense of achievement that had nothing to do with titles or compensation. What mattered was that I had built this life through hard work, through believing in myself when others hadn't, through persistence and integrity. I had become successful not to prove Olivia wrong, but because I had finally recognized and embraced my own potential. The motivation had shifted somewhere along the way from external validation to internal drive, from reacting to acting, from proving to building. That evening, I called my parents to share the news of my promotion. Their pride was palpable even across the phone line. My father, usually reserved with his emotions, actually choked up as he expressed how proud he was of the man I'd become. After hanging up, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse apartment, looking out over the city lights, reflecting on the strange, winding path that had led me here. From heartbreak to healing, from self-doubt to self-assurance, from being defined by someone else's assessment to defining myself through my own choices and achievements. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Olivia, a rarity, as our communication was typically limited to formal emails about work matters. "Heard about your promotion. Congratulations. You've more than earned it." Kerfornio. I smiled slightly, appreciating the gesture, while noting that it no longer carried the emotional weight it once might have. I typed a simple response, "Thank you. I hope all is well with you." Brief, polite, without a hint of the complex history between us, just as it should be between colleagues with a shared past but separate futures. As I set my phone down, I realized that this was the final victory. Not over Olivia, but over the power I had once given her to define my worth. The circle was complete. My girlfriend once said I'd never amount to anything. Now I'm her boss. And neither fact defines who I really am. They say power changes people, that once you reach a certain level of influence and authority, you inevitably transform, sometimes into someone you barely recognize. I've spent the past 6 months wondering if that transformation had begun in me, watching for signs that success was corrupting the person I had worked so hard to become. The Executive Vice President's office at Axion Technologies occupied the corner of the 29th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city and harbor beyond. It was easily 3 times the size of my previous space, with a private conference area, a small kitchenette, and furnishings that probably cost more than my entire first apartment. My name, Eric Caldwell, Executive Vice President, Global Operations, was etched on a sleek plaque beside the door, a daily reminder of how far I'd come. Sometimes early in the morning before my assistant arrived, or late in the evening after everyone else had gone home, I would stand at those windows and try to reconcile the man I now was with, the one Olivia had dismissed as mediocre and unambitious just 3 years earlier. The contrast was still jarring, even to me. The transformation wasn't just in my title or office. I had changed physically, mentally, socially. My wardrobe now consisted entirely of custom-tailored suits and designer casual wear. My once average physique had been sculpted through rigorous sessions with a personal trainer who counted celebrities among his clients. I moved in circles that would have intimidated the old Eric. Charity galas with billionaires, private dinners with industry leaders, strategy sessions that could affect thousands of employees worldwide. But had I changed fundamentally? Had power altered the core of who I was? That question nagged at me more than I cared to admit. My new role had thrust me into the highest echelons of the company. I now reported directly to Marcus Whitman, with a team of 8 directors overseeing various operational divisions across the globe. My decisions affected thousands of employees, millions in revenue, and countless customers who relied on Acxions technology. Among those employees, of course, was Olivia Bennett, still serving as Senior Brand Director for European Operations. Our professional interactions remained cordial but distant, limited to quarterly review meetings and the occasional Global Leadership Summit. She performed well in her role, consistently meeting or exceeding her targets, maintaining the strictly professional relationship we had established. I had gone from being the boyfriend she deemed unworthy to being 2 levels above her in the corporate hierarchy. The irony wasn't lost on me, though it no longer provided the vindictive satisfaction I might once have craved. What had begun as a journey fueled by the desire for revenge had evolved into something more meaningful, a genuine pursuit of excellence for its own sake. Or so I thought, until a series of events forced me to question everything I believed about my motivations, my character, and what truly constituted success. It began on a Tuesday in March during our quarterly global leadership meeting. These gatherings brought together Acxions' top 50 executives from around the world for 2 days of strategic planning, performance reviews, and alignment on key initiatives. As the EVP of Global Operations, I played a central role in orchestrating the agenda and facilitating many of the sessions. The meeting was being held at Acxions' newly renovated conference center, a sleek, modern facility adjacent to headquarters. I arrived early to review my presentation and ensure everything was in order. As executives began filtering in, I greeted them with the practiced ease I had developed, remembering personal details about their families or recent achievements, making each person feel valued and recognized. Olivia arrived with the European contingent, dressed impeccably in a burgundy suit that somehow managed to be both professionally appropriate and distinctly fashionable. She caught my eye across the room and offered a polite nod, which I returned before continuing my conversation with our Asia-Pacific Regional Director. The meeting commenced with Marcus Whitman's opening remarks, his trademark blend of strategic vision and pragmatic business focus. As he outlined Acxions' performance for the previous quarter and goals for the coming year, I observed the room, gauging reactions and identifying which initiatives might face resistance. Before we dive into departmental updates, Whitman said as he concluded his overview, "I want to announce an exciting new opportunity. As many of you know, we've been exploring ways to expand our footprint in the Asian market. Today, I'm pleased to share that we've signed a letter of intent to acquire Nephron Technologies, a Singapore-based enterprise software company specializing in supply chain optimization." A ripple of interest moved through the room. Nephron was well respected in the industry, with proprietary algorithms that could potentially enhance several of Acxions' core products. This acquisition represents a significant strategic investment. Whitman continued, "To ensure its success, we'll be forming a dedicated integration team, similar to the approach we took with Prism Media 2 years ago." My attention sharpened. The Prism integration had been my pathway to rapid advancement. It made sense that I would play a key role in this new acquisition as well. "Eric," Whitman said, turning toward me, "given your success with the Prism integration, I'd like you to oversee this process at the executive level." I nodded as expected. "Of course. I'll start putting together a preliminary approach this week." "Excellent." Whitman's gaze moved across the room. "However, for the day-to-day management of the integration, we need someone with deep understanding of Asian markets and cultural nuances. After careful consideration, I've decided to appoint Olivia Bennett as the lead integration director for this project. I maintained my neutral expression through years of professional discipline, but internally I felt a jolt of surprise. Olivia looked equally startled, though she quickly composed herself. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said, her voice steady. "I'm looking forward to the challenge. Your experience with cross-cultural marketing initiatives and your successful management of our European rebrand makes you well suited for this role." Whitman explained. You'll report directly to Eric throughout the process, with dotted line accountability to Jason Reynolds for marketing-specific elements. And just like that, the careful professional distance I had maintained from Olivia was about to collapse. The acquisition would require intensive collaboration, strategy sessions, and likely travel to Singapore together. After nearly 2 years of minimal interaction, we would suddenly be working closely again, with me as her direct supervisor for the duration of the project. The meeting continued, but my mind was already racing ahead, analyzing the implications. Was this a test from Whitman? A coincidence? A strategic decision based purely on Olivia's qualifications without any consideration of our history? I forced myself to refocus on the discussion at hand, making mental notes to speak with Whitman privately afterward. Whatever his reasoning, the decision had been made. Now I needed to ensure that our past didn't interfere with the success of a critical business initiative. As the morning session concluded and executives broke for lunch, Olivia approached me. Her expression was professional but slightly guarded. Do you have a moment to discuss the Nephron integration? She asked. I nodded, gesturing toward a small meeting room off the main conference area. Of course. Once inside with the door closed, she spoke directly. I want to be clear that I didn't lobby for this assignment. It came as a complete surprise to me. I didn't assume you had, I replied, appreciating her straightforwardness. Whitman makes these decisions based on business needs, not personal preferences. Exactly. She seemed to relax slightly. Given our history, I wanted to address this directly. I assume we're both capable of maintaining a strictly professional relationship throughout this project. Absolutely, I agreed. Our personal history is irrelevant to the task at hand. I'll evaluate your work on this integration by the same standards I would apply to any director in the organization. She nodded, apparently satisfied. Good. In that case, I'd like to schedule a preliminary planning session later this week. I have some initial thoughts on approach based on my experience with Asian markets during my time at Prism. Send some options to my assistant. I'll make time in my calendar. I kept my tone businesslike, maintaining eye contact without any hint of discomfort. I'd suggest including Jason in that first meeting since marketing integration will be a significant component. Already on my list, she said with a slight smile. Some things haven't changed. I still prefer to come to meetings over-prepared. The small personal reference could have created awkwardness, but instead it somehow diffused the tension. We had both acknowledged the elephant in the room and agreed to work around it. Over-prepared is better than the alternative, I replied. I look forward to seeing your preliminary thoughts. As she turned to leave, I added, and Olivia, congratulations on the assignment. It's a significant vote of confidence from Marcus. She paused, seeming momentarily surprised by the genuine sentiment. Thank you, Eric. I won't let either of you down. After she left, I remained in the meeting room for a moment, collecting my thoughts. I had meant what I said. The assignment was indeed a vote of confidence in her abilities. Whitman didn't make such decisions lightly, especially for an acquisition of this magnitude. But I couldn't help wondering how this new dynamic would play out. 3 years ago, Olivia had walked out of my life, convinced I lacked the ambition and capability to succeed at her level. Now she would be reporting directly to me on a high-visibility project that could significantly impact both our careers. Life had a strange way of coming full circle. Later that afternoon, I knocked on Whitman's office door. He waved me in without looking up from his computer, finishing an email before giving me his full attention. Eric, come in. I'm guessing this is about the Nephron integration? I closed the door and took a seat across from him. Yes, specifically about your choice of Olivia Bennett as the lead director. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. Is there a problem with my selection? Not necessarily a problem, I replied carefully. I'm just curious about the reasoning, given that we have several directors with more direct experience in the Asian market. Such as, he challenged. David Chen in our Hong Kong office has overseen 3 regional acquisitions. Sarah Noonan has been managing our APAC client implementations for 4 years. Whitman nodded, both excellent at their respective roles. But neither has Olivia's particular skill set. David understands the market but lacks integration experience. Sarah knows implementations but hasn't handled anything of this magnitude. His reasoning was sound, I had to admit. But I suspected there was more to it. Is there another factor influencing your decision? I asked directly. A slight smile crossed his face. You're wondering if I'm deliberately throwing you and Olivia together, given your history. I managed to hide my surprise. You know about that, Eric, he said with a hint of amusement. I make it my business to understand the dynamics within my executive team. Did you think I appointed her to the Prism integration without knowing you two had a personal history? The revelation shifted my understanding of the past 2 years. I had assumed Whitman had been unaware of the connection when he'd first brought me into Axion's leadership. "So you knew when you hired me?" "Not initially," he admitted, "but I figured it out during the Prism acquisition." Richard Harmon mentioned something about Olivia's personal connection to you. I had my HR team do some discreet checking. Nothing invasive, just confirming that you had a prior relationship. I processed this information, unsure how to feel about it. "And you still put me in charge of the integration that would determine her future with the company." "I did," he confirmed without hesitation. "And you handled it with complete professionalism. You evaluated her role based on business needs and performance metrics, not personal history. That told me everything I needed to know about your character." "And now?" I asked. "This new assignment feels like a test." Whitman leaned forward, his expression serious. "It's not a test, Eric. It's an opportunity for both of you. Olivia genuinely is the best person for this role, and you're the best executive to oversee it. The fact that you once had a personal relationship is irrelevant to me. The question is whether it's still relevant to you." The directness of his question caught me off guard. "It's not," I said after a moment. "That chapter closed long ago." "Good." He stood, signaling that our discussion was winding down. "Then I expect the same level of professionalism you've consistently demonstrated. The Nephron acquisition is strategically crucial for our Asian expansion. Personal feelings, past or present, can't be allowed to interfere." "They won't," I assured him, standing as well. As I reached the door, he added, "For what it's worth, I think you've both grown considerably since whatever happened between you. Sometimes the most effective professional partnerships emerge from complicated personal histories. You understand each other's strengths and weaknesses in ways that can be leveraged for better outcomes." I nodded, though I wasn't entirely convinced. "I appreciate your confidence. I'll make sure the integration succeeds regardless of who's on the team." "I never doubted that," he replied. Walking back to my office, I reflected on Whitman's revelation. He had known about my history with Olivia for years, had perhaps even seen the Prism integration as a test of my professional judgment. And I had passed, advancing to executive leadership based not just on my operational skills, but on my ability to separate personal feelings from business decisions. Now I faced a similar challenge, but with a key difference. During the Prism integration, I had been evaluating Olivia's role from a distance, with minimal direct interaction. The Nephron project would require intensive collaboration over many months. Could we truly maintain that professional separation under such circumstances? More importantly, why did the question still matter to me at all? If I had truly moved beyond our history, as I believed I had, then working with Olivia should be no different than working with any other talented director in my organization. The fact that I was even questioning it suggested that perhaps some unresolved feelings remained. Not romantic feelings, certainly, but something more complex. Something tied to validation, to proving that I had become successful on my own merits rather than in reaction to her dismissal of my potential. I reached my office and closed the door, needing a moment of privacy to process these thoughts. Outside my windows, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city, illuminating some buildings while leaving others in darkness, an apt metaphor for how selectively we sometimes examine our own motivations. Had I really achieved all this for myself? Or was some part of me still that wounded man, desperately trying to prove Olivia wrong? The question was uncomfortable, but I knew I needed to face it honestly before embarking on this new project. The success of the acquisition, and perhaps my future at Axion, depended on it. The initial planning meeting for the Nephron integration took place 3 days later in my office conference area. Olivia arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Jason Reynolds, our Vice President of International Marketing, and Sophia Chang, our Chief Legal Counsel, who would be overseeing the regulatory aspects of the acquisition. "Thank you all for making time on short notice." I began after everyone was settled. The Nephron acquisition represents a significant strategic opportunity for Axion, and the timeline Marcus has outlined is aggressive. I displayed a preliminary schedule on the wall screen, showing key milestones leading to the projected closing date 3 months away. 3 months isn't much time for due diligence and integration planning, Sophia noted, reviewing the timeline with a slight frown, especially with the regulatory complexities in Singapore. "Agreed," I said, "which is why we need to be exceptionally efficient in our approach." I turned to Olivia. "You mentioned having some initial thoughts based on your experience with Asian markets?" She nodded, activating her tablet to share documents with the room's display system. "I've prepared a preliminary framework that addresses what I believe will be our 3 main challenges: The screen filled with a well-organized presentation, thorough, insightful, and clearly the product of significant preparation. Over the next 20 minutes, Olivia walked us through her proposed approach, highlighting potential cultural and operational friction points and suggesting mitigation strategies. I watched her with professional admiration. She was excellent at this, articulate, thoughtful, able to anticipate objections and address them proactively. Whatever complicated feelings might exist between us personally, there was no denying her capabilities in this arena. The cultural integration will be particularly delicate, she was saying. Nephron's leadership team is primarily Singaporean and Japanese, with corporate values that differ significantly from Axion's more direct American approach. I'm suggesting we conduct cultural alignment workshops before attempting any organizational restructuring. That's smart, Jason agreed. We faced similar challenges when integrating our Japanese marketing team last year. The workshops made a significant difference. I'd like to add something, I interjected. Based on my experience with the Prism integration, I think we should consider embedding key Axion personnel within Nephron's operation for the first month post-acquisition. Not as supervisors, but as observers and relationship builders. Olivia looked up, her expression showing genuine interest. That's an excellent suggestion. It would give us insights that formal reporting might miss, while demonstrating respect for their existing processes. The meeting continued in this vein for nearly 2 hours. Collaborative, productive, focused entirely on the business challenge at hand. By the end, we had outlined a comprehensive approach that addressed legal, operational, cultural, and marketing aspects of the integration. This is excellent work, I concluded as we wrapped up. Olivia, can you refine this framework into a formal plan for presentation to Marcus by the end of next week? Absolutely, she replied. I'll schedule time with each of you individually to dive deeper into your respective areas. As the meeting dispersed, I found myself pleasantly surprised by how smoothly it had gone. There had been no awkwardness, no subtle power dynamics, or unspoken tensions. Just 4 professionals focused on solving a complex business challenge. Olivia remained behind after the others left, gathering her materials. That went well, she observed. Better than I expected, honestly. Professional adults doing their jobs shouldn't be surprising. I replied with a slight smile. But I know what you mean. She hesitated a moment, then asked, Are you comfortable with me leading this? You seem genuinely supportive in there. But if you'd prefer someone else, I meant what I said to Marcus, I interrupted. You're the right person for this assignment. Our history doesn't change that. She nodded, seemingly relieved. Good, because I'm actually excited about this project. It's exactly the kind of challenge I've been looking for. You'll do well with it, I said and meant it. Your approach is thorough and thoughtful. Just keep me informed of any significant issues that arise. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. We've both come a long way, haven't we? The question was loaded with potential landmines, but her tone was simply reflective, without agenda. We have, I agreed, and that's a good thing. After she left, I returned to my desk, struck by the strange normalcy of the interaction. Working with Olivia had felt ordinary, professional, uncomplicated. Perhaps Whitman was right. We had both grown considerably since our relationship ended. Perhaps our history was finally just that, history. Or perhaps I was setting myself up for a rude awakening by underestimating the complexity of what lay ahead. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as the Nephron acquisition moved forward. Due diligence teams were assembled, legal reviews commenced, and integration planning accelerated. Olivia proved to be exceptionally capable in her role, navigating complex cultural and operational challenges with skill and sensitivity. Our working relationship remained strictly professional. We interacted primarily in group settings, with occasional one-on-one meetings focused entirely on project specifics. If others on the team were aware of our history, they showed no sign of it. 4 weeks into the process, Whitman called us both to his office to discuss progress. The preliminary reports are encouraging, he said, reviewing the documentation we provided. Nephron's technology stack is as robust as we'd hoped, and their client base in the APAC region will give us the foothold we've been seeking. Their leadership team is cautiously optimistic as well, Olivia added. Initially, there was some resistance to the idea of being absorbed by an American company, but our cultural approach has helped alleviate many of their concerns. Whitman nodded approvingly. That's the kind of nuance I was hoping you'd bring to the process. He turned to me. And operationally, their systems are compatible with ours with minimal modification, I reported. The bigger challenge will be harmonizing processes and reporting structures. They operate much more hierarchically than we do. Which brings me to the next phase. Whitman said, leaning forward, I want you both to travel to Singapore next week. Spend time on site, meet with their full leadership team, and start building the personal relationships that will be crucial for a smooth transition. I glanced at Olivia, who maintained her professional composure, though I detected a slight tension in her posture. A week in Singapore together would represent a significant shift in our carefully maintained professional distance. How long do you anticipate us being there? I asked. At least a week, possibly 10 days, Whitman replied. Enough time to conduct a thorough assessment and begin establishing trust with key personnel. He looked between us. Any concerns with that timeline? Not at all, Olivia responded smoothly. I'll start preparing immediately. Same here, I agreed, matching her professional tone. We'll make the most of the time on the ground. As we left Whitman's office, Olivia kept pace beside me. This will be interesting, she observed quietly. It's a business trip, I replied. We'll be focused on the acquisition. Of course, she agreed. Still, spending that much time together, in a different cultural context, it's a significant shift from our carefully scheduled meetings here. She wasn't wrong. The structured, time-limited interactions we'd maintain were about to give way to dinners, long working sessions, car rides, and all the unstructured time that comes with international business travel. We're both professionals, I said with more confidence than I felt. We've proven we can work together effectively. This is just an extension of that. She nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. I'll have my assistant coordinate with yours on the travel arrangements. Perfect. Let's plan a pre-trip briefing early next week to align on objectives and approach. With that, we parted ways, each returning to our respective offices. As I settled behind my desk, I found myself strangely unsettled by the prospect of extended time with Olivia in a foreign setting. Not because I feared any romantic rekindling, that possibility was long past, but because the enforced proximity might disrupt the carefully constructed professional relationship we'd established. I reminded myself that I was no longer the emotionally vulnerable man whose heart she had broken. I was an executive, secure in my position and accomplishments. Whatever complicated feelings might still linger from our past, they were manageable, containable. The success of the acquisition depended on my ability to maintain that perspective. Still, as I reviewed the preliminary integration plans that afternoon, I couldn't shake a nagging sense of uncertainty. Something about this Singapore trip felt like a turning point, though whether for better or worse remained to be seen. Singapore greeted us with its characteristic blend of oppressive humidity and stunning modernity. We arrived on a Sunday evening, exhausted from the long flight, but with a full schedule beginning early the next morning. The company had booked us into the Marina Bay Sands, one of the city's most iconic hotels, with its distinctive triple towers connected by a rooftop infinity pool, stretching across them like a floating ship. Our suites were on the same floor, but thankfully not adjacent, a small mercy that provided at least the illusion of personal space. After agreeing to meet for breakfast at 7 a.m., we retreated to our respective rooms to recover from the journey and prepare for the week ahead. Alone in my suite, I showered away the stale feeling of international travel and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, taking in the spectacular nighttime view of Singapore's skyline. The city glittered below, a testament to what vision and ambition could build in a single generation. It was a fitting backdrop for contemplating transformation and possibility. My phone chimed with an email. Olivia sending a refined agenda for our first meeting with Nephron's leadership team tomorrow. Even jet-lagged, she was focused on the work. I had to admire her professionalism, her ability to compartmentalize whatever personal discomfort she might feel about our situation. I responded with a brief acknowledgement and a few minor suggestions, then ordered room service rather than venturing out. The last thing I needed was to run into Olivia in the hotel restaurant, forcing us into an awkward dinner conversation before our official work had even begun. Sleep came fitfully, my body clock thoroughly confused by the time change. I woke well before my alarm, used the extra time for a workout in the hotel's gym, and arrived at breakfast precisely at 7 to find Olivia already seated, reviewing documents on her tablet. Good morning, I said, taking the seat across from her. Sleep well? As well as can be expected with the time difference, she replied, setting her tablet aside. You? About the same. Nothing that coffee won't fix. We fell into a surprisingly comfortable discussion of the day's objectives as we ate, reviewing key personnel we would be meeting and establishing our respective roles in the conversations. This was Olivia at her professional best, prepared, strategic, focused on outcomes rather than personalities. By the time we left for Nephron's headquarters, any awkwardness had dissipated, replaced by the familiar rhythm of two colleagues with a job to do. The Axion car service delivered us to a sleek office tower in Singapore's business district, where we were escorted to a conference room with sweeping views of the harbor. Nephron's CEO, Dr. Lim Wei-jae, greeted us with formal courtesy. A man in his early 60s with silver hair and the measured demeanor of someone who chose his words with care. He was accompanied by his executive team, a diverse group representing the company's multinational character. "Welcome to Singapore, Doctor," Lim said as we exchanged business cards with the proper formality. "We trust your journey was comfortable?" "Very much so," I replied, following the cultural protocol of small talk before business that I knew was expected. "We're grateful for your hospitality and looking forward to productive discussions this week." What followed was a carefully choreographed day of presentations, facilities tours, and initial discussions about integration approaches. Olivia and I worked in seamless tandem, with her taking the lead on cultural and marketing aspects while I focused on operational and technical elements. Several times throughout the day, I caught members of Nephron's team watching us with what seemed like approval. Clearly, they had been concerned about Axion imposing American-style directness, but were reassured by our more nuanced approach. "Your colleagues work well together, Dr. Nelmi, Lim commented to me quietly during an afternoon tea break. "It speaks well of Axion's leadership culture. Miss Bennett is exceptional at navigating complex cultural transitions," I replied. "That's precisely why she's leading this integration." He nodded, observing Olivia across the room where she was engaged in animated conversation with Nephron's marketing director. She listens before speaking, a rare quality in Western executives. The day concluded with a formal dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Singapore River. As we were seated, Olivia and I flanking Dr. Lim at the center of the table, I realized this would be our first extended social interaction since arriving. To my relief, the conversation remained comfortably professional, focused on getting to know each other's backgrounds and approaches, rather than diving immediately into acquisition details. Olivia charmed the table with her genuine interest in Singapore's history and culture, asking thoughtful questions that allowed our hosts to share their perspectives and expertise. I watched her navigate the complex social dynamics with impressive skill, knowing when to lead the conversation and when to defer, how to introduce ideas without making them sound like mandates, when to employ humor and when to maintain formality. It was a masterclass in cross-cultural communication. By the time dessert was served, the atmosphere had relaxed considerably, with even the more reserved members of Nephron's team engaging openly in the discussion. Dr. Tonasumankuna, Lim seemed pleased with the progress, nodding thoughtfully as strategic possibilities for the combined companies were explored. "A successful first day," Olivia observed as we rode back to the hotel in Axion's car service. "They're cautious but not resistant." "Agreed. Dr. Lim seems particularly impressed with your approach." I glanced at her in the dimly lit car interior. "You handled the cultural elements perfectly." She smiled slightly, looking out at the passing cityscape. "My time in London taught me a lot about adapting to different business cultures. Americans tend to be too direct, too focused on immediate outcomes." "You're not wrong," I acknowledged. "It's something I've had to work on myself." A comfortable silence fell between us as the car navigated through Singapore's immaculate streets. It struck me that this was the most normal conversation we'd had in years. Two professionals exchanging observations without the weight of our history pressing down on every word. As we reached the hotel, Olivia checked her watch. "It's only 9:30. Would you want to grab a drink and debrief more thoroughly? The rooftop bar is supposed to be spectacular." The invitation caught me off guard. We had carefully avoided any situation that might blur the line between professional and personal interaction. "Just to review tomorrow's approach," she added, perhaps sensing my hesitation. "The schedule looks particularly intensive." I considered briefly, then nodded. "That makes sense. Let's get changed and meet there in 20 minutes. Perfect. 25 minutes later, I stepped off the elevator onto the hotel's rooftop level, immediately understanding why this space was world famous. The infinity pool stretched across the building's entire width, appearing to drop off directly into the glittering cityscape beyond. Adjacent to it, a sophisticated bar area offered comfortable seating with the same breathtaking view. Olivia was already there, having secured a quiet table near the edge of the terrace. She had changed from her business attire into casual elegance. dark jeans and a simple silk blouse that somehow looked both relaxed and refined. I had opted for similar casual business wear, comfortable but still appropriate for a professional meeting. "This view is incredible," I said as I joined her, accepting the gin and tonic she had apparently already ordered for me. Remembering my preferred drink, just as she had at her London gathering more than a year ago. "It's worth the jet lag just for this," she agreed, gesturing toward the panoramic vista of Singapore at night. "I've read about this place but never had the opportunity to visit until now." We spent the first 15 minutes discussing the next day's meetings as planned, identifying key stakeholders who might need special attention, and refining our approach to potential sticking points in the integration. The conversation was productive and focused, exactly what one would expect from colleagues on a business trip. But as we finished our first drinks and ordered a second round, something subtle shifted. Perhaps it was the setting, romantic despite our intentions, or the strange intimacy of being thousands of miles from home in an unfamiliar city. Whatever the cause, our conversation began to drift beyond the strict boundaries of the Nephron acquisition. "How are you finding the EVP role?" Olivia asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "It's a significant leap from where you were when we first met." The reference to our shared past was casual, without the loaded undertones that might have accompanied it in previous interactions. "Challenging but fulfilling," I replied after a moment's consideration. "The scope of responsibility is sometimes overwhelming, but I've discovered I actually enjoy the strategic aspects more than I expected." She nodded. "That doesn't surprise me. You always had a talent for seeing the big picture, even when you were focused on smaller projects at Meridian." It was a generous assessment, especially considering her previous criticism of my career ambitions. Rather than dwelling on the contradiction, I found myself curious about her own journey. "What about you? Has the London to Singapore transition been what you hoped professionally?" "Mostly," she said, swirling the ice in her glass thoughtfully. "London was a crucial step for me. It forced me out of my comfort zone, made me prove myself in a different environment. The Prism acquisition could have derailed that momentum, but thanks to your fair evaluation, it became another opportunity instead." The acknowledgement was unexpected. "I just assessed the business case," I said, downplaying the decision that had preserved her role. "Your performance metrics spoke for themselves. We both know you could have justified eliminating my position if you'd wanted to," she countered. "Acquisitions always come with redundancies, and our history gave you ample personal reason." It was the most direct reference to our past since our uncomfortable conversation in my office when she had first returned from London. Yet somehow in this setting, it felt less loaded, more like acknowledging a shared understanding rather than reopening old wounds. "That would have been unprofessional," I replied simply, "and ultimately bad for the business. Your skills were valuable to the combined organization." She studied me for a moment, then smiled slightly. "You really have changed, you know. Not just the externals, the job, the clothes, the physical transformation. There's a centeredness to you now, a comfort with who you are that wasn't there before." The observation was perceptive and oddly touching. "I suppose there is," I acknowledged. "Success helps with that, but it's more about proving something to myself than to anyone else." "Even me?" she asked quietly, holding my gaze. A loaded question, one that brushed against the very doubts I'd been wrestling with since the Nephron project began. Had I truly moved beyond seeking her validation? Initially, perhaps, I admitted after a thoughtful pause. But that motivation burned out a long time ago. "Whatever I'm building now, I'm building for myself." She nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. "That's as it should be." Our conversation drifted to lighter topics. Books we'd read recently, places we'd traveled, the peculiarities of corporate life at the executive level. It was strangely easy, this exchange between two people who had once been so intimately connected and then so painfully separated. As midnight approached, we finally acknowledged the need for sleep before another intensive day of meetings. Walking together to the elevator, I found myself reflecting on how natural the evening had felt. Not a rekindling of old feelings, but perhaps the beginning of something I hadn't anticipated. A genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared experience. "Thank you for the debriefing session," Olivia said as we reached her floor. "I think we're well aligned for tomorrow." "We are," I agreed. "You were right to suggest it." She hesitated a moment, then added, "This was nice, Eric. Working with you, it's been easier than I expected." "For me as well," I admitted. "See you at breakfast, 7 a.m.? "I'll be there." As the elevator continued to my floor, I leaned against the wall, processing the evening. There had been no awkwardness, no tension, no undercurrent of unresolved emotions. Just two colleagues who happened to share a complicated history, finding a way to work together effectively. It was, I realized with some surprise, exactly what mature professionals should be capable of. Perhaps Whitman had been right to place us in this situation after all. The rest of the week in Singapore unfolded in a similar pattern. Intensive days of meetings and negotiations, followed by business dinners and occasional evening debriefing sessions that gradually became more relaxed and wide-ranging in their topics. Olivia and I developed a natural rhythm in our working relationship, each instinctively knowing when to lead and when to support the other, how to amplify each other's points without seeming to contradict Accion's unified position. Our hosts at Nephron clearly approved of the approach. By Thursday, what had begun as cautious openness had evolved into genuine enthusiasm for the acquisition and the possibilities it represented. Dr. Lim, initially the most reserved, was now actively suggesting ways to accelerate certain aspects of the integration. "Your team has exceeded our expectations," he told me during a private meeting in his office. "Particularly Miss Bennett. She has a remarkable ability to honor our cultural perspectives while still advancing Accion's strategic objectives. She's one of our most valuable executives." I replied, the praise coming easily because it was deserved. "That's why she was selected for this role." He nodded thoughtfully. "You work well together. There is harmony in your approach that speaks to a deep professional understanding." If he suspected any personal history between us, he gave no indication. In the Asian business context, such matters would remain carefully unacknowledged, even if perceived. Friday's closing meetings produced what Whitman had hoped for, a signed memorandum of understanding that accelerated the acquisition timeline and established clear protocols for the integration process. It was a significant win for Accion and a personal success for both Olivia and me. We celebrated with the Nephron team at an elegant restaurant overlooking the botanical gardens, an evening of genuine camaraderie that left me feeling optimistic about the acquisition's prospects. As we said our goodbyes, we would be returning to the States the following day. Dr. Lim surprised us with beautiful lacquered boxes containing ceremonial tea sets. "A small token of appreciation for your respectful approach," he said, presenting them with a slight bow. "We look forward to building something exceptional together." Back at the hotel, the satisfaction of a successful mission created a buoyant mood as we shared a final debriefing drink at the rooftop bar. The week's accumulated tensions released in relaxed conversation and occasional laughter as we recounted some of the more challenging moments we'd navigated together. When their CFO started questioning the valuation methodology, I thought we were going to lose all the goodwill we'd built. Olivia recalled, smiling over her glass of wine. "The way you redirected the conversation to long-term growth projections was masterful." "Only because you had already established the cultural foundation," I countered. "They were willing to hear the redirection because you'd built that trust from day one." She lifted her glass slightly. "To effective partnerships, then. Professional ones," she added, clarifying with a small smile. I clinked my glass against hers. "Professional partnerships." "Absolutely." As the evening wound down, a comfortable silence fell between us, both of us gazing out at the spectacular Singapore skyline. The week had changed something fundamental in our dynamic. Not erasing our history, but somehow placing it in a different context. We had proven that we could not just coexist professionally, but actually collaborate effectively, enhancing each other's strengths rather than being hindered by our shared past. "You know," Olivia said finally, breaking the silence, "I think I owe you an apology." I turned to her, surprised. "For what?" "For how I ended things between us. Not that we would have worked out long-term," she clarified, "but the way I delivered that message was unnecessarily cruel. I've regretted that for a long time." The unexpected acknowledgement caught me off guard. We had carefully avoided discussing our personal history in any detail during the trip, focusing instead on the present and the acquisition at hand. "That was a long time ago," I said after a moment. "We've both moved beyond it." "Have we?" she asked quietly. "Because I sometimes wonder if the way I treated you created a wound that's influenced everything you've done since. If my cruelty became the catalyst for your transformation, which would mean I'm still affecting your choices, even now." The observation was uncomfortably perceptive, echoing my own private doubts. Had my entire career trajectory been a response to her rejection? Even now, as an executive vice president, was I still trying to prove something to the woman who had deemed me inadequate? "Initially, perhaps you were right," I admitted after a thoughtful pause. The things you said that night, they cut deep. And yes, proving you wrong became a motivation for a while. She nodded, her expression somber. I thought as much. Which means I owe you more than an apology. I owe you gratitude. Gratitude? I echoed, confused. For not becoming bitter. For using that pain as fuel for growth rather than destruction. She looked at me directly. When I realized what you'd accomplished, how far you'd come, I feared you might use your position to exact some kind of revenge. Most people would have. That was never my intention, I said, though I couldn't deny that the thought had briefly crossed my mind when I first learned of the Prism acquisition. Professional decisions should be based on business needs, not personal history. And that right there, she said, gesturing toward me with her glass, is why you deserve the position you've achieved. Not everyone maintains that ethical clarity when given power over someone who hurt them. Her words left me momentarily speechless. This was a level of vulnerability and honesty we hadn't approached in years. Perhaps had never truly reached even during our relationship. I think, I said finally, that we've both grown in ways that wouldn't have been possible if we'd stayed together. As painful as the ending was, it set us both on paths that were ultimately right for us individually. She considered this, then nodded slowly. That's a generous perspective, and probably true. She finished her wine and set the glass down. I should get some sleep. Early flight tomorrow. Of course. I signaled for the check. I'll see you in the lobby at 8 a.m. Actually, she said, standing, there's been a slight change of plans. I got an email from Marcus this afternoon. He wants me to continue on to our Tokyo office for some preliminary discussions about how the Nephron acquisition might affect our Japanese operations. Oh, I said, surprised by the change and my own fleeting disappointment. That makes sense strategically. How long will you be there? Just 3 days. Then back to London briefly before returning to headquarters for the integration planning phase. She gathered her purse. So I guess this is goodbye for now. For now, I agreed, standing as well. You did exceptional work this week, Olivia. The acquisition wouldn't be moving forward without your contribution. Thank you. She hesitated, then stepped forward and kissed my cheek lightly. A gesture that, in any other context, might have seemed overly familiar, but somehow felt appropriate as the conclusion to the strange intimacy of our week together. Safe travels, Eric. As I watched her walk away, I was struck by a realization. The woman who had once broken my heart no longer held any power over me. Not because I had risen above her professionally, not because I had proven her assessment wrong, but because I had finally truly stopped measuring my worth against her opinion. Whatever motivation her rejection had initially provided had long since been replaced by genuine intrinsic drive. A desire for excellence that had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong, and everything to do with proving myself right about what I was capable of achieving. It was, I reflected as I signed the check and headed to my own room, perhaps the most valuable outcome of our Singapore trip. More significant even than the successfully negotiated acquisition. The return journey gave me ample time to reflect on the week in Singapore and its unexpected outcomes. Beyond the professional success of the accelerated acquisition agreement, I had gained something I hadn't anticipated, a resolution to the nagging question of whether my career transformation had been genuinely for myself or merely a reaction to Olivia's rejection. The answer I now understood was both, and that was okay. What had begun as a desire to prove her wrong had evolved into something authentic and internally driven. The catalyst for change mattered less than what that change had ultimately become. Back at Axion headquarters, I delivered a comprehensive briefing to Whitman, highlighting the agreements reached and Olivia's exceptional handling of the cultural aspects of the negotiation. So the gamble paid off, he observed with satisfaction. Putting you two together produced better results than either of you might have achieved individually. It did, I acknowledge. Her approach complemented mine effectively. And personally, he asked, his gaze shrewd, has that particular complication been resolved? I considered the question carefully. I believe it has. Whatever history exists between us doesn't interfere with our professional relationship. If anything, it gives us a deeper understanding of each other's strengths and approaches. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good, because the next phase will require even closer collaboration. Once she returns from Tokyo, I want you both leading the integration planning from headquarters. The legal team estimates closing within 6 weeks, and I want us ready to move immediately. Of course, I agreed, feeling none of the apprehension that might have accompanied such a directive before Singapore. We'll deliver a comprehensive plan before closing. The following 3 weeks were consumed with acquisition preparations, legal reviews, financial structuring, communication planning for both internal and external stakeholders. I worked closely with various departments to ensure operational readiness, while periodically receiving updates from Olivia about her Tokyo discussions and subsequent return to London. Her emails were professional but warmer than before Singapore, occasionally including personal observations or small jokes that acknowledged our improved rapport. I found myself responding in kind, maintaining professional boundaries while allowing for the more collegial relationship that had developed during our time together. When she finally returned to headquarters in early May, we fell easily into a productive working rhythm, co-leading the integration planning with a natural division of responsibilities that played to our respective strengths. The awkwardness that might have characterized our interactions before Singapore was entirely absent, replaced by a comfortable professional camaraderie that seemed to surprise our colleagues who had witnessed our previously more formal dynamic. Whatever happened in Singapore transformed your working relationship, Jason Reynolds observed during a planning session break. You two are actually finishing each other's sentences now. We discovered we work well together, I replied simply. Sometimes it takes the right project to bring out effective collaboration. The truth was more complex, of course. Singapore had provided the space for us to address and move beyond our personal history, to see each other as the professionals we had become, rather than through the lens of our failed relationship. What had emerged wasn't a rekindled romance. That possibility had long since passed. But something I hadn't anticipated, a genuine friendship rooted in mutual respect and understanding. This evolution became particularly evident during a critical presentation to the board of directors 2 weeks before the acquisition closing. Olivia and I had prepared extensively, anticipating questions and refining our integration approach based on feedback from various stakeholders. Standing together before the board, 12 serious executives scrutinizing our every word, we delivered a seamless presentation, transitioning between sections with natural fluidity and supporting each other's key points. When challenging questions arose, we handled them as a united front, demonstrating complete alignment on the strategic direction. Impressive work, Whitman commented after the board unanimously approved our approach. That's exactly the kind of executive partnership I was hoping to see develop. As we gathered our materials, Olivia leaned close. Dinner to celebrate. We deserve it after that performance. The invitation felt natural, without the hesitation or careful qualification that might have accompanied it before Singapore. Absolutely. Giovanni's at 8? Perfect. Giovanni's was an upscale Italian restaurant frequented by Axion executives. Nice enough for a celebration, but not so formal as to suggest anything beyond a professional dinner. We were seated at a quiet corner table, comfortable in each other's company in a way that would have seemed impossible months earlier. To board approval, Olivia said, raising her wine glass, and to proving that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships turn out to be the most effective. I clinked my glass against hers. To unlikely partnerships. As we enjoyed the excellent food and wine, our conversation drifted beyond the acquisition to broader career reflections and even cautious personal updates. I learned that Olivia had been seeing someone in London, a relationship that had ended amicably when the Nephron assignment brought her back to headquarters. She, in turn, asked about my personal life, seeming genuinely pleased when I mentioned a few casual dates but nothing serious. You seem content, she observed. Comfortable in your own life in a way you weren't before. I am, I agreed. I've found a balance that works for me. The job is demanding but fulfilling, and I've made room for other interests as well. Like what? She asked, seeming genuinely curious. I started sailing last year. Nothing fancy, small boats on the bay. But there's something about being on the water, having to work with elements you can't control. It's both challenging and peaceful. She smiled. That suits you somehow. I can picture you on a boat, figuring out how to harness the wind. The evening continued in this vein. Easy conversation between two people who had once been intensely connected, then painfully separated, and were now finding their way to a new kind of relationship built on who they had become rather than who they had been. As we walked to our respective cars afterward, Olivia paused. This is nice, you know. Being able to work together, to have dinner, to just be normal with each other. It is, I agreed. Not something I would have thought possible a year ago. Me neither. She hesitated, then asked, Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you happy? Truly happy with where you are now? Not just professionally, but with your life overall? The question caught me off guard with its directness and genuine concern. I considered it carefully before answering. I am, I said finally, not in the way I might have defined happiness before. That constant excitement or intensity that comes with new relationships or achievements. It's quieter now, more steady. I'm satisfied with who I've become, proud of what I've built. That feels like a deeper kind of happiness. She nodded slowly. That's what I thought. You have a centeredness now that's impressive, enviable even. What about you? I asked, turning the question back to her. Are you happy? She considered this, her expression thoughtful in the dim parking lot lighting. I'm getting there. The professional success is there, obviously, but I'm still working on the personal contentment part, still learning to measure my worth by my own standards rather than external validation. The admission was surprisingly vulnerable, especially from someone who had always projected such confidence and self-assurance. That's a journey worth taking, I said. And for what it's worth, I think you're further along it than you realize. She smiled, a genuine expression without the careful calculation that had often characterized her expressions in the past. Thank you for that, and for allowing this new dynamic between us. It would have been easier to maintain formal distance. Easier, maybe, but not better, I replied. Working well together matters more than awkwardness over ancient history. Ancient history, she repeated with a small laugh. I suppose it is now, isn't it? We said our goodnights then, each heading to our separate vehicles. As I drove home, I reflected on how profoundly our relationship had transformed. From romantic partners to painful exes to awkward professional acquaintances, and now to something approaching genuine friendship. The journey hadn't been linear or easy, had involved hurt and growth and significant change on both sides. But the outcome felt right, a resolution that honored both our shared history and our individual growth beyond it. The Nephron acquisition closed successfully in late May, right on the accelerated timeline we had negotiated in Singapore. The integration process began immediately, following the comprehensive plan Olivia and I had developed and the board had approved. As expected, there were challenges, cultural friction points, technological integration issues, the inevitable human resistance to change. But the foundation we had established with Dr. Lim and his team proved solid enough to weather these difficulties. Olivia continued to excel in her role as integration lead, demonstrating the same cultural sensitivity and strategic insight that had impressed me in Singapore. We worked closely through the initial phase, our professional partnership now characterized by mutual trust and respect, rather than the careful distance we had once maintained. 3 months into the integration, with all major milestones achieved on or ahead of schedule, Whitman called us both to his office for what I assumed would be a routine progress review. Instead, he had something else entirely in mind. The board is extremely pleased with the Nephron acquisition. He began uncharacteristically formal in his tone. The integration has progressed more smoothly than any in our corporate history, and early financial indicators suggest we'll exceed the projected synergies by at least 20%. That's excellent news, I replied, glancing at Olivia, who seemed as puzzled as I was by the formal delivery of what should have been simply positive feedback. It is, Whitman agreed, and it's created an opportunity I want to discuss with both of you. He leaned forward, his expression serious. I've been considering our organizational structure in light of our continued expansion, particularly in international markets. The Nephron acquisition is just the beginning of a more aggressive global growth strategy we'll be pursuing over the next 5 years. He turned to Olivia. Your handling of the cultural aspects of this integration has confirmed what I've observed since the Prism acquisition. You have exceptional talent for navigating cross-cultural business challenges and building bridges between different corporate value systems. She straightened slightly, professional composure masking whatever reaction she might be having to this unexpected praise. Thank you. It's work I find particularly rewarding. Good, Whitman said with a nod. Because I'm creating a new position, Chief Integration Officer, reporting directly to me as part of the executive leadership team. The role would oversee all aspects of merger and acquisition integration, with particular focus on cultural alignment and retention of key talent. He paused, allowing the implication to sink in. A C-suite position reporting directly to the CEO represented a significant leap from Olivia's current director-level role, the kind of advancement that typically took years to achieve. I'd like you to consider taking this position, he continued. Your work on both Prism and Nephron has demonstrated exactly the skills and perspective needed. And with our accelerated acquisition strategy, This function will be critical to our success. Olivia's composure slipped momentarily, genuine surprise showing through her professional demeanor. I'm honored by your confidence, Marcus. The role sounds fascinating and challenging in exactly the ways I value. It will be, he confirmed. You'd build your own team, define the methodologies, and work across all business units to ensure successful integrations. He slid a folder across his desk, his signature move for delivering significant opportunities. Details are in here. Review them and let me know your thoughts by the end of the week. She accepted the folder, her hands steady despite what must have been considerable emotional reaction to this unexpected opportunity. I will. Thank you for your consideration. Whitman turned to me then. Which brings me to you, Eric. Your oversight of the operational aspects of both integrations has been equally impressive, and your partnership with Olivia on this project has demonstrated the kind of collaborative leadership we need at the highest levels of the organization. I nodded, wondering where this was heading. My position as EVP was already near the top of Action's hierarchy, directly below Whitman himself and the board. As our global footprint expands, he continued, I find myself increasingly pulled in too many directions. The board and I have been discussing creating a new position, Chief Operating Officer, to oversee all global operations and essentially serve as second in command for the entire organization. The implication was clear, but Whitman made it explicit. I'd like you to step into this role, effective immediately. Even with my experience receiving unexpected promotions, this caught me completely off guard. COO was just one step below CEO, the position that would make me Whitman's clear successor when he eventually retired or moved to a purely board role. I'm honored, I said, finally finding my voice, and somewhat surprised. This is a significant elevation. It's warranted, Whitman replied simply. You've demonstrated not just operational excellence, but true leadership, the ability to see the big picture while still managing the critical details, to build effective teams, to make difficult decisions when necessary. He smiled slightly. Plus, the board likes you. Never underestimate the importance of that. Like Olivia, I received a folder outlining the new position, responsibilities, compensation, reporting structure. The numbers on the first page made even my current executive salary look modest by comparison. Take a few days to review the details, Whitman said, though his tone suggested he already knew my answer. We'll announce both promotions next Monday if you both accept. As we left his office, Olivia and I exchanged stunned glances, wordlessly agreeing to find a private place to process what had just happened. We ended up in my office, closing the door for a rare moment of unguarded reaction. Chief Integration Officer, I said, shaking my head in amazement. That's incredible, Olivia. Absolutely deserved, but still incredible. COO, she countered, equally amazed. That's basically naming you as Whitman's successor. He's grooming you to take over when he retires. I hadn't allowed myself to articulate that implication, but she was right. The COO position was traditionally the stepping stone to CEO, especially when created specifically for an individual, rather than as part of a long-standing organizational structure. I think he's setting us both up for significant roles in Action's future, I said, still processing the magnitude of the opportunity. These aren't just promotions. They're fundamental shifts in the company's leadership approach. Olivia sank into one of my visitor chairs, her professional composure momentarily abandoned in favor of genuine reaction. I never imagined this when I agreed to lead the Nephron integration. A C-suite position. It's everything I've worked towards since business school. You've earned it, I said sincerely. Your handling of both integrations has been exceptional. Whitman sees that value clearly. She looked up at me, her expression suddenly vulnerable in a way I rarely witnessed. You know what's strangest about this moment? Part of me wants to call my parents, to show them the offer letter, to finally prove that all their pushing and pressure and expectations were worth it. I understood immediately. Olivia had rarely spoken about her family during our relationship, but the few references had painted a picture of demanding parents with impossibly high standards, perhaps the source of her own relentless drive for achievement and external validation. And the other part? I asked gently. The other part understands that if I'm still seeking their approval at this point in my career, I've learned nothing. She smiled sadly. That's the real challenge, isn't it? Accepting this amazing opportunity because it's right for me, not because it will finally make someone else see my worth. The insight was powerful and clearly hard-won through her own journey of self-reflection. It reminded me of my own evolution, from desperately trying to prove Olivia wrong about me to pursuing excellence for its own sake. For what it's worth, I said, I think you're taking this role for the right reasons. I've watched you work on the Nephron integration. You genuinely love the challenge of bridging different corporate cultures, of creating something cohesive from disparate parts. This position lets you do that work at the highest level. She nodded slowly. You're right. It's work I find deeply satisfying. She looked at me directly. And you? Are you taking the COO role for yourself? Or is there still some part of you that wants to show the world, or me, how wrong they were about your potential? The question was direct but not accusatory, a genuine inquiry from someone who understood the complex motivations that can drive career decisions. 3 years ago, proving you wrong would have been a significant factor, I admitted. Even a year ago, there might have been some element of that remaining. But now, I shook my head. This is about the work itself, about building something meaningful, about using the capabilities I've discovered in myself to their fullest extent. Good, she said simply, because you're going to be an exceptional COO, and probably CEO after that. The vote of confidence from the woman who had once deemed me fundamentally lacking in ambition and capability should have felt like the ultimate vindication. And perhaps there was an element of that satisfaction. But mostly it felt like the recognition of one professional by another, an acknowledgement of growth and achievement that had nothing to do with our personal history. Thank you, I said. I think you'll make an exceptional CIO as well. Axion will be stronger for having you in that role. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, each processing the magnitude of the opportunities before us. Then Olivia smiled slightly. You know what's ironic? If we had stayed together, if I hadn't been so cruelly dismissive of your potential, neither of us might be sitting here with these offers right now. I raised an eyebrow. How do you figure that? You might never have found the motivation to push beyond your comfort zone at Meridian. I might never have moved to London and developed the cross-cultural expertise that makes me valuable for this role. She shrugged slightly. Sometimes the painful endings lead to better destinations than the comfortable continuations would have. It was a perspective I hadn't fully considered, that our breakup, as painful as it had been, had ultimately served both our professional development in ways that staying together might not have. That's an interesting way to look at it, I acknowledged. I'm not sure I would trade the pain of that night for anything, but I can't deny that it set me on a path that led here. Exactly, she said. Not that the end justified the means. The way I handled it was unnecessarily hurtful. But the outcome, for both of us, has been something neither of us could have predicted or planned. I nodded, seeing the truth in her assessment. So we both accept these positions and continue moving forward. Not defined by our past connection, but not denying it either. Precisely. She stood, gathering the folder Whitman had given her. I should go review this properly. Dinner tomorrow to discuss after we've had time to process? Perfect, I agreed. Giovanni's at 7. I'll be there. She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Eric, I'm truly happy for you. Not just professionally, but for the person you've become. Someone who takes this opportunity for the right reasons, who's found his center and purpose beyond proving anyone wrong. The sentiment was genuine and touching. Thank you, Olivia. That means more than you might imagine. After she left, I remained in my office for a long time, staring out the windows at the city beyond, processing the remarkable turn of events. Chief Operating Officer of Action Technologies, a position that would place me among the top executives in the industry, with compensation, influence, and responsibility beyond anything I could have imagined just a few years earlier. The journey from passed-over project coordinator to this moment had been extraordinary, driven initially by pain and the desire for vindication, but evolving into something far more meaningful: the discovery of capabilities I hadn't known I possessed, the development of a leadership style rooted in both empathy and strategic clarity, the building of a professional reputation based on results rather than relationships. And perhaps most remarkably, the path had led me back to a healthier relationship with the very person whose rejection had sparked the transformation. Not a romantic rekindling, but something in many ways more valuable. A professional partnership, an emerging friendship built on genuine respect and understanding of each other's strengths and journeys. As I finally opened Whitman's folder to review the details of the COO position, I felt a deep sense of peace and rightness. This opportunity wasn't about proving Olivia wrong anymore. It wasn't even about proving myself right. It was simply the next logical step in a career that had become a genuine expression of my capabilities and values rather than a reaction to someone else's assessment. I had moved beyond revenge to something far more powerful: self-actualization on my own terms. The announcement of our dual promotions created the expected stir throughout Axion. While executive changes were not uncommon in a fast-growing company, the simultaneous elevation of two leaders, particularly to such senior roles, generated significant interest both internally and in the industry press. Whitman handled the communication masterfully, presenting the promotions as part of Axion's strategic preparation for accelerated global growth. The company's stock price rose 5% on the news, a market validation of the leadership approach that added nearly $1 billion to Axion's market capitalization overnight. My first month as COO was a whirlwind of activity, setting up my new leadership team, establishing priorities across the global operation, and working closely with Whitman to define our respective roles and responsibilities. The learning curve was steep but exhilarating, challenging me to leverage every skill and insight I had developed throughout my career. Olivia similarly dove into her new role as Chief Integration Officer, assembling a small but skilled team and developing a comprehensive methodology for future acquisitions. We collaborated frequently, our respective functions naturally overlapping as Axion pursued its aggressive growth strategy. Our working relationship continued to evolve, the mutual respect and understanding that had developed during the Nephron integration deepening into a genuine professional partnership. Where once our history had created awkwardness and distance, it now provided a foundation of shared understanding that enhanced our ability to work together effectively. This evolution didn't go unnoticed within the organization. Catherine Chen, our Chief Human Resources Officer and a keen observer of executive dynamics, commented on it during a leadership team dinner 3 months after our promotions. "The two of you have developed one of the most effective executive partnerships I've seen in my career," she noted, her tone approving. "It's particularly impressive given how different your approaches are. Eric with his methodical operational focus, Olivia with her intuitive cultural insights. You complement each other remarkably well." Whitman, overhearing the comment, nodded in agreement. "That complementary dynamic is exactly why I wanted both of you in these roles. Leadership teams function best when different perspectives can be expressed and integrated without ego getting in the way." If he knew or suspected the full complexity of our history, he gave no indication. As far as Axion's leadership was concerned, we were simply two executives who had discovered an effective working partnership. The truth, of course, was more nuanced. The journey from bitter exes to collaborative colleagues had required significant growth on both sides. My evolution beyond the need for vindication, Olivia's development of greater self-awareness and genuine empathy. What had emerged was a relationship unlike any I had experienced before. Not friendship in the conventional sense, not former lovers maintaining polite distance, but something unique that honored both our shared history and our individual evolutions beyond it. This new dynamic was perhaps best exemplified 6 months into our new roles, when Axion hosted its annual leadership conference in Napa Valley. The 3-day event brought together the company's top 100 leaders from around the world for strategic planning, team building, and celebration of the previous year's achievements. As COO, I delivered the opening keynote after Whitman's welcome address, outlining our operational priorities for the coming year and acknowledging the exceptional performance that had positioned Axion for continued growth. Later that day, Olivia led a session on cultural integration that received the highest ratings of any presentation at the conference. The evening concluded with a dinner in the vineyard, a beautiful setting with long tables arranged among the vines and soft lighting, creating a warm, celebratory atmosphere. I found myself seated next to Olivia, both of us relaxing after our successful presentations. Quite a different scenario from where we were 3 years ago. She observed quietly, gesturing subtly at the gathering of Axion's leadership elite. If someone had described this future to me then, I would never have believed it. Me neither, I admitted, thinking back to those dark days after our breakup. Especially not the part where we're actually enjoying working together. She smiled, sipping her wine. That might be the most surprising element of all. Though perhaps it shouldn't be. We always did have intellectual chemistry, even when other aspects of our relationship were strained. It was a fair assessment. Even during our romance, our most satisfying connections had often been conversations about ideas, strategies, perspectives on the world. The physical attraction had been strong, certainly, but the mental engagement had been equally compelling. True, I acknowledged. Though this is different, cleaner in some ways. Professional collaboration without the emotional complications. She studied me for a moment. Is it really without emotional complications, though? Or have we just learned to navigate them more effectively? It was a perceptive question, cutting to the heart of what made our current relationship unique. There was history between us, intense, painful history that couldn't simply be erased. But rather than pretending it didn't exist, we had somehow found a way to acknowledge it while not allowing it to define our present interactions. I said after considering her question, that the emotions have transformed rather than disappeared. What was once romantic love, then bitter disappointment, has evolved into something like deep mutual respect with a foundation of shared experience. She nodded slowly. That's well put. There's an intimacy that comes from having seen each other at both our worst and our best. A kind of knowing that can't be developed through professional interaction alone. Exactly. And that knowing, when channeled into professional collaboration, creates something uniquely effective. The conversation paused as Whitman rose to offer a toast to the leadership team, praising their contributions and setting ambitious goals for the coming year. As glasses were raised around the tables, I caught Olivia's eye, a moment of shared understanding amid the corporate ritual. When the formal dinner concluded, many executives moved to the outdoor bar area where a small jazz combo was playing. Olivia and I found ourselves at a quiet table on the periphery, continuing our conversation away from the main group. I've been meaning to ask you something, she said, her tone shifting to something more personal. Are you seeing anyone currently? The question was unexpected, and I felt a moment of wariness. May I ask why you're curious? She smiled slightly. Not for the reason you might be concerned about. I've just noticed that for someone as successful and, frankly, attractive as you've become, you seem unusually unattached. I wondered if that was a deliberate choice. I relaxed, recognizing the question as genuine curiosity rather than a prelude to something more complicated. Partly deliberate, yes. The COO role consumes most of my time and energy, and what remains I've been dedicating to my personal interests, sailing primarily, and some volunteer work with a youth mentoring program. But no significant relationship? I shook my head. There have been a few connections that might have developed into something meaningful, but the timing never seemed right. And truthfully, I've become fairly content with my independence. She nodded thoughtfully. I understand that. After London, I've been similarly focused on my career, rather than romantic relationships. The few I've attempted ended when the men couldn't understand why I would prioritize work when necessary. It takes a particular kind of partner to understand the demands of roles like ours. I agreed. Someone secure enough in themselves not to feel threatened by our ambition or success. Exactly. And those people seem to be rare finds. She swirled the wine in her glass. Though I've recently met someone who might qualify. A professor at Stanford's business school. Brilliant, established in his own career, and seemingly comfortable with my schedule and position. That sounds promising, I said, surprised to find I meant it genuinely. How long have you been seeing him? Just a few months. Still early, but different from previous relationships. More balanced. She looked at me directly. I wanted you to know, not because it should matter to you professionally, but because of the unique place you occupy in my life. It would feel strange for you to hear about it from someone else. I appreciated the consideration behind her disclosure. Thank you for telling me. I hope it continues to develop positively. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, I find myself in the strange position of wanting your good opinion of him. Should you ever meet, your perspective matters to me. It was a vulnerable admission that my opinion still carried weight with her, not as a superior in the organizational hierarchy, but as someone whose judgment she valued personally. If he's earned your interest, I'm sure he's exceptional. I replied, and I'm genuinely happy for you, Olivia. You deserve someone who recognizes your worth and supports your ambitions. She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. That means more than you might imagine, especially coming from you, considering our history. The conversation drifted to lighter topics after that. Predictions about Axion's growth trajectory, observations about other executives in attendance, shared amusement at some of the more enthusiastic dancing now taking place near the band. As the evening wound down, we walked together toward the hotel portion of the resort, the path illuminated by soft landscape lighting. This has been nice, Olivia observed. Being able to talk so openly, without the tension that once characterized our interactions. It has, I agreed. I think we've finally reached a place where our past informs, but doesn't constrain our present. She nodded, then stopped walking to face me directly. Can I ask you something else? Something I've wondered but never had the courage to ask? Of course. Are you truly happy with how everything has unfolded? Not just professionally, but with how our personal story has resolved? If you could go back and change anything about how we ended or what came after, would you? It was a profound question, one that required careful consideration. I looked past her to the beautiful vineyard stretching into the darkness, gathering my thoughts. Happiness is a complex concept. I said finally, am I content with where I am now, both professionally and personally? Yes, genuinely so. Would I have chosen the path that led here, with all its pain and struggle? Probably not, if given the choice at the outset. I met her gaze directly. But would I change anything now, knowing where it all led? No, because changing any part of that journey might have resulted in a different destination. One where I hadn't discovered what I was truly capable of, or developed the resilience that now defines me. She nodded slowly, processing my answer. That's essentially how I feel as well. The path was harder than it needed to be, with wounds I wish I hadn't inflicted or received. But the outcome? She gestured vaguely, encompassing our current reality. This couldn't have been reached without all of that. Exactly. And this, I mirrored her gesture, is something neither of us could have predicted or designed. A professional partnership that leverages our history rather than being hindered by it. A friendship of sorts that honors who we once were to each other while celebrating who we've each become independently. She smiled then, an expression of genuine warmth and understanding. Well said. To unlikely journeys and unexpected destinations, then. To unlikely journeys, I echoed. We continued walking toward the hotel in comfortable silence. Two people who had traveled a long and complicated road to arrive at a destination neither could have imagined. Not just successful executives at the pinnacle of our careers, but individuals who had found a way to transform a painful shared history into something constructive and meaningful. It wasn't the resolution I might have imagined during those dark days after Olivia walked out of my life. Back then, I had fantasized about revenge, about proving her wrong in the most dramatic way possible. And in a sense, that had happened. I had become everything she once claimed I couldn't be, had risen to a position where I was not just her equal, but her organizational superior. But the satisfaction of that outcome paled in comparison to the deeper fulfillment of having transcended the need for such validation, of having discovered my own capabilities, built a life of genuine meaning, and even found a way to transform that once painful relationship into something constructive and unique. The truth was, becoming Olivia's boss had never been the real victory. Finding myself, the authentic self beyond both her assessment and my reaction to it, had been the true achievement. Everything else, the title, the compensation, the influence, were merely external validations of that internal transformation. As we reached the hotel lobby and prepared to go our separate ways, Olivia surprised me by briefly touching my arm. Thank you, Eric. For what? I asked. For allowing both of us to become more than what we were when we were together. For seeing me as I am now, not just as the person who hurt you then. For helping create this unexpected but valuable connection we found. It was perhaps the most genuine expression of appreciation she had ever offered. Not for something I had done for her professionally, but for the personal growth that had allowed our current relationship to develop. Thank you as well, I replied simply. For similar reasons. We parted then, each heading to our respective rooms, both understanding that we had reached a kind of resolution that few former couples ever achieve. Not a rekindling or a forgiveness that erased the past, but a transformation that honored it while creating something entirely new. 1 year into my tenure as COO, Axion hosted its annual charity gala, a prestigious event that brought together executives, key clients, and community leaders for an evening of networking and fundraising. As one of the company's top executives, I was expected not just to attend, but to play a visible role, hosting a table of important guests and contributing to the evening's philanthropic objectives. The event was held at the city's Natural History Museum, transformed for the night into an elegant venue with twinkling lights, flowing champagne, and the subtle hum of power and influence that characterizes such gatherings. I arrived early, ensuring everything was in order before guests began arriving. Olivia was already there when I arrived, stunning in a floor-length gown of deep emerald that complemented her chestnut hair, now grown out from the bob she had worn in London. She was engaged in conversation with the museum's director, likely discussing the educational initiative that would receive the evening's proceeds. She noticed me across the room and excused herself, making her way toward me with the confident grace that had always been part of her appeal. "Eric, good evening." She greeted me warmly. "Everything looks perfect, doesn't it?" "It does," I agreed, taking in the transformed space. "The events team has outdone themselves this year." "Indeed. Oh, before I forget," she lowered her voice slightly, "James will be joining us tonight. I wanted to give you a heads up. James Sullivan was the Stanford professor she had been seeing for nearly a year now. A relationship that had developed into something significant enough that he occasionally accompanied her to company events. I had met him briefly at a smaller function and found him to be exactly as she had described: intelligent, secure in his own professional standing, and genuinely supportive of Olivia's career. "I look forward to seeing him again," I said sincerely. "He seemed like a good match for you from our brief interaction." She smiled, seeming pleased by my assessment. "He is. Unlike some of my previous relationships, there's no competition or insecurity, just mutual respect and support." She gave me a meaningful look. "I've learned a lot about what makes a healthy partnership." The comment held layers of meaning we both understood: acknowledgement of the flaws in our own relationship and recognition of how those lessons had informed her current choices. "Growth looks good on you," I observed. "You seem genuinely happy." "I am," she confirmed. "In all aspects of my life, actually. The CIO role continues to challenge me in all the right ways. And personally," she shrugged slightly, "let's just say I'm learning to measure success differently than I once did." Our conversation was interrupted as guests began arriving in earnest, requiring both of us to shift into our official roles as action executives. The evening progressed as such events do: cocktails, dinner, speeches, the ceremonial presentation of an oversized check to the charitable cause, followed by dancing and continued networking. Throughout the night, I observed Olivia with James. The easy comfort between them, the way he seemed genuinely interested in her colleagues and work, the subtle, supportive gestures that suggested a relationship built on mutual respect rather than power dynamics or validation seeking. It was, I realized, exactly the kind of relationship that might have eluded us, even if we had somehow overcome our other challenges. Back then, neither of us had been secure enough in ourselves to truly support the other's growth without feeling threatened or diminished by it. Later in the evening, during a brief lull in the festivities, James approached me directly. "Eric, do you have a moment?" "Of course," I replied, curious about what Olivia's partner might want to discuss privately. We moved to a quieter area near one of the museum's impressive dinosaur displays. James, a tall man with thoughtful eyes behind stylish glasses, seemed to be considering his words carefully. "I wanted to thank you," he said finally, "though that may seem strange given the nature of your history with Olivia." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by the direct reference to our past relationship. "Thank me for what exactly?" "For the role you've played in her journey." He gestured vaguely toward where Olivia was engaged in animated conversation with a group of clients. "She's told me about your shared history. Not every detail, I'm sure, but enough for me to understand the significance of your current working relationship." This was unexpected. I had assumed Olivia would have mentioned our past to him, but not that it would be a topic he would raise directly with me. "That's an unusually mature perspective," I observed. He smiled slightly. "I'm a professor of organizational psychology. The evolution of relationships, personal and professional, is literally my field of study." His expression grew more serious. "What you and Olivia have managed to create from a potentially toxic history is remarkable. A genuine collaboration built on mutual respect despite significant emotional complications." I studied him, impressed by his insight and directness. "It wasn't a straightforward path," I acknowledged, "but I think we're both better for having traveled it." "Precisely," he nodded. "And that's why I wanted to express my appreciation. The Olivia I know, confident but not arrogant, ambitious but not at the expense of her humanity, was partly shaped by that journey with you. Both the relationship itself and its aftermath. It was perhaps the most unusual conversation I'd ever had at a corporate event, discussing the emotional evolution of a shared ex-partner with her current significant other. Yet somehow it didn't feel awkward or inappropriate. There was a genuine acknowledgement of complex human dynamics that transcended conventional social boundaries. "I appreciate your perspective," I said finally. "And for what it's worth, I'm glad she's found someone who understands and supports her as you seem to." He smiled. "I could say the same about her having a colleague who can leverage your shared history constructively rather than allowing it to create professional barriers." We were interrupted by Whitman, who approached with a potential client he wanted me to meet. As James excused himself, he offered a parting comment. I hope we'll have the opportunity for more substantive conversation in the future. Your journey is fascinating from both a personal and professional perspective. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of handshakes, strategic conversations, and the careful cultivation of relationships that is the true purpose of such events. By the time the gala concluded, it was past midnight, with only a few executives and their guests remaining for final conversations. I found Olivia and James preparing to leave and approached to say goodnight. Successful event, I observed. The foundation director told me we exceeded the fundraising target by nearly 30%. Excellent news, Olivia replied. The educational program will be fully funded then. She glanced between James and me. I saw you two in conversation earlier. Should I be concerned? The question was asked lightly, with a small smile that suggested she wasn't actually worried. Not at all, James assured her. Just expressing mutual appreciation for the role each of us has played in your life, albeit in very different capacities and timeframes. She raised an eyebrow, looking momentarily surprised before shaking her head with a laugh. Only you would approach my ex-boyfriend and current boss to have a philosophical discussion about relationship evolution at a corporate gala. Occupational hazard of dating a professor of organizational psychology, he replied with good humor. Everything is potentially data for research. The exchange was telling, comfortable, gently teasing, without the undercurrent of power struggle or emotional manipulation that had sometimes characterized my interactions with Olivia during our relationship. They seemed to have achieved a balance that allowed for mutual growth rather than competition or codependence. We should go, Olivia said, checking the time. Early flight to London tomorrow for the European Leadership Summit. Safe travels, I replied. I'll see you when you return for the quarterly planning session next week. As they departed, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had led to this moment. Standing in a museum surrounded by relics of the ancient past, while witnessing the culmination of my own personal history's evolution. The bitter ex-girlfriend who had once dismissed my potential was now a valued colleague who respected my leadership. The vengeful fantasy of becoming her boss to prove her wrong had transformed into a productive professional partnership that benefited both our careers. And the man who had once defined his worth through her validation now stood confident in his own capabilities, genuinely pleased to see her finding fulfillment both professionally and personally. It was, I realized, the completion of a circle that had begun that painful night when Olivia had walked out of my life. But unlike most circular journeys, this one hadn't returned us to the starting point. It had elevated us to a higher plane of understanding, both of ourselves and each other. As I prepared to leave the event, Whitman appeared at my side. Successful evening, he observed, surveying the now empty venue. You and Olivia both represented Axion beautifully. Thank you, I replied. The team did an exceptional job with the arrangements. He nodded, then added with characteristic directness, You know, when I first put you two together on the Nephron project, I wasn't entirely certain how it would play out. Your history created either a significant risk or a unique opportunity. I wasn't sure which. The casual reference to our past relationship confirmed what I had long suspected. Whitman had deliberately engineered our collaboration as a test of both our professional maturity and potential for executive leadership. A calculated risk, then, I observed. The best kind, he agreed with a slight smile. The results speak for themselves. Not just the successful acquisitions, but the leadership dynamic you've developed. It's exactly what Axion needs as we continue to expand globally. I considered his words carefully. You were testing whether we could transform a personal complication into a professional advantage. Precisely. He looked at me approvingly. At the executive level, leadership isn't just about strategy or operations. It's about emotional intelligence, the ability to navigate complex human dynamics and transform potential friction points into productive energy. It was a perspective I had come to appreciate deeply during my tenure as COO. Technical skills and business acumen were necessary but insufficient for truly effective leadership. The ability to understand, manage, and channel the human elements, including difficult histories and complex emotions, often made the difference between success and failure at the highest levels. A lesson well learned, I acknowledged. Whitman nodded, then changed the subject to an upcoming board presentation, our conversation shifting back to standard business matters. But as we walked out together, he offered a final observation that stayed with me long after. The measure of true leadership isn't found in how we handle success, but in how we transform our greatest challenges, personal and professional, into sources of strength and insight. By that standard, you've proven yourself more than ready for whatever comes next. Whatever comes next. Whitman's words echoed in my mind over the following months as Axion continued its aggressive global expansion. Under my operational leadership and with Olivia's integration expertise, the company successfully acquired 4 more technology firms across 3 continents, nearly doubling our size and significantly expanding our product portfolio. The pace was grueling but exhilarating. Constant travel, endless strategic decisions, the delicate balancing of disparate organizational cultures into a cohesive whole. Through it all, Olivia and I continued our effective partnership, our complementary approaches creating results that neither could have achieved independently. 18 months into my COO role, during a quarterly board meeting, Whitman made an announcement that sent ripples through the executive team and the wider business community. He would be stepping down as CEO within 6 months, transitioning to executive chairman while a new chief executive was appointed to lead Axion's next phase of growth. The succession planning process would be thorough, but expedited, he explained, with both internal and external candidates considered. The board would make the final decision, though Whitman's recommendation would carry significant weight. As the presumptive internal frontrunner given my COO position, I found myself in a strange limbo, continuing to manage Axion's global operations, while simultaneously being evaluated for the CEO role. The process was rigorous. Detailed assessments, strategy presentations, intensive interviews with board members, and evaluation of my leadership philosophy and vision for Axion's future. Throughout this period, Olivia remained a steady professional presence, neither commenting directly on the succession process, nor allowing it to affect our working relationship. If she had opinions about my potential elevation to CEO, a position that would make me her direct superior and the ultimate authority on her own career trajectory, she kept them private. 3 months into the process, as external candidates were being interviewed alongside my continued assessment, Whitman invited me to his home for dinner, an unprecedented step that signaled a shift from formal evaluation to more personal consideration. His residence was exactly what one might expect from a legendary tech CEO, a modernist masterpiece overlooking the bay, filled with museum-quality art and cutting-edge technology seamlessly integrated into the living space. Yet there was a warmth to the environment that belied the popular image of Whitman as a relentlessly focused business tactician. My wife's influence, he explained, noting my appreciation of the home's balanced design. She reminds me that environments shape thinking. Too much cold minimalism leads to sterile ideas. The evening began with a tour of the property and casual conversation about non-business matters, a deliberate step away from the formal evaluation process that had dominated our interactions recently. Over dinner, prepared by a private chef who discreetly served us before departing, Whitman finally turned the conversation toward Axion's future. The succession process is nearing its conclusion, he said, sipping an impressive Bordeaux. The board will make its decision next week. I nodded, maintaining my composure despite the significance of the moment. I appreciate the thoroughness of the evaluation. Whoever leads Axion next should be subjected to rigorous assessment. Indeed, he studied me thoughtfully. You've performed exceptionally well throughout the process. Your strategic vision for Axion's next phase is compelling, and your operational track record speaks for itself. I inclined my head in acknowledgement of the praise but offered no comment, sensing there was more to come. There's one question I haven't asked directly, he continued, though it's perhaps the most important. He set down his glass, his expression serious. Why do you want to be CEO of Axion Technologies? It was a deceptively simple question that cut to the heart of motivation and purpose. Not just what I could do in the role, but why I wanted it in the first place. The kind of question that could reveal whether a candidate was seeking the position for ego, power, compensation, or something more substantive. I considered my response carefully, aware that Whitman would see through any practiced, polished answer that didn't reflect genuine self-awareness. 10 years ago, I would have wanted it to prove something. To myself, to others who doubted me, to the world at large. I began honestly. 5 years ago, I might have wanted it for the validation, the external confirmation of my capabilities and worth. Whitman nodded, neither approving nor disapproving, simply acknowledging the candor of my self-assessment. Now, I continued. I want it because I believe I can guide Axion through its next evolution more effectively than anyone else. Not from ego, but from a clear-eyed assessment of the challenges ahead and my particular combination of skills and perspective to address them. I leaned forward slightly, warming to the subject. I understand Axion's DNA, the operational excellence that's been our foundation, the innovation culture you've cultivated, the delicate balance between aggressive growth and sustainable practices. But I also see the next horizon, the need to evolve beyond pure technology into more integrated solutions, the importance of cultural cohesion as we become truly global, the opportunity to redefine what enterprise software means in an AI-driven ecosystem. Whitman listened intently, his expression unreadable. Most importantly, I concluded, I want it because I've come to care deeply about what we're building. Not just products or market share or shareholder value, though those matter, but the organization itself, the culture, the people, the potential to create something that outlasts any individual leader, including myself. A moment of silence followed as Whitman seemed to weigh my words against some internal standard. Finally, he nodded, a slight smile appearing. That, he said simply, is the right answer. The remainder of the evening shifted to more specific discussions about transition plans, board dynamics, and the challenges I would face if selected. While Whitman never explicitly confirmed that I was the board's choice, the nature and detail of our conversation left little doubt about the probable outcome. As I prepared to leave, Whitman walked me to the door, pausing for a final observation. The journey that brought you here is unusual, Eric. From mid-level project coordinator to potential CEO in less than 5 years, that's not a typical career trajectory. No, I agreed. It's not, but that atypical path may be your greatest strength, he continued. You've experienced Axion from multiple perspectives. You understand what it means to be overlooked, to struggle for recognition, to transform limitation into opportunity. That gives you a breadth of perspective most executives at your level simply don't possess. His assessment was insightful, acknowledging that what might have been seen as a weakness in my background, the lack of a traditional executive career path, had actually created a unique leadership perspective. One last piece of advice, he added as I stepped outside. Leadership at this level is fundamentally about legacy. Not your personal legacy, but the legacy you create for the organization and everyone within it. The best CEOs understand they are temporary stewards of something larger than themselves. I nodded, absorbing the wisdom of a man who had built Axion from a startup to a global technology leader. I'll remember that. I believe you will, he replied. That's why you'll have my full support with the board. 1 week later, Axion's board of directors unanimously approved my appointment as the company's next chief executive officer, effective upon Whitman's transition to executive chairman in 2 months' time. The announcement generated significant media attention, with business publications highlighting my meteoric rise and unorthodox career path to the top leadership position. Among the first to congratulate me was Olivia, who stopped by my office the morning after the public announcement, a bottle of champagne in hand. I thought this called for a proper celebration, she said, setting the bottle on my desk. Maybe save it for after hours, though corporate governance might frown on midday drinking. I smiled, genuinely touched by the gesture. Thank you. I'm still processing it myself. You shouldn't be, she replied, taking a seat across from me. You've earned this, Eric. No one who's worked with you these past few years would question your readiness for the role. Her validation, offered freely and genuinely, meant more than she might have realized. Not because I still needed her approval, but because it represented how far we had both come from the dynamics that once defined our relationship. I appreciate that, I said simply, and I want you to know that your role as CIO remains crucial to Axion's strategy going forward. The acquisition pipeline is fuller than ever, and your integration methodology has become a key competitive advantage. She waved away the reassurance. I never doubted that. This isn't a conversation between an incoming CEO and a nervous executive. It's between two people with a unique history celebrating a significant milestone. Her framing of the moment was perfect, acknowledging both our professional relationship and the complex personal journey that had preceded it. In that case, I replied, let me say something not as your future CEO, but as someone who once thought his worth was defined by your assessment of his potential. Thank you for being catastrophically wrong about me all those years ago. She laughed, a genuine sound of amusement without defensiveness. You're welcome for my terrible judgment. I've never been happier to be proven completely mistaken. The moment crystallized how completely our relationship had transformed, from the painful dynamics of our breakup to this comfortable acknowledgement of our shared history, now viewed through the lens of mutual growth rather than lingering resentment. "Will you stay?" I asked, referring to her future at Axion under my leadership. "Of course," she replied without hesitation. "We're building something significant here, and my role is central to that vision. Besides," she added with a small smile, "I've invested too much in figuring out how to work effectively with you to start over with another CEO." The response was characteristic of the woman she had become, confident in her value, comfortable with our complex history, committed to the work itself rather than external validation. As she left my office, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this moment. From heartbroken ex-boyfriend to chief executive officer, from seeking revenge to finding purpose, from defining myself through someone else's assessment to recognizing my own intrinsic value. The title on my door would soon change to the most powerful position in the company, making me not just Olivia's boss, but the leader of an organization with thousands of employees and billions in market value. Yet the true achievement wasn't the position itself, but the person I had become in pursuit of it. Someone who had transformed pain into purpose, rejection into resilience, and a desire for vindication into a vision for something larger than myself. Whitman's words about legacy echoed in my mind. My appointment as CEO wasn't the culmination of my journey, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one focused not on proving my worth to others, but on creating value for the organization and opportunities for everyone within it, including, ironically, the woman who had once deemed me incapable of significant achievement. Life, it seemed, had a peculiar sense of poetry, transforming what began as a quest for revenge into something far more meaningful. The discovery of my authentic self, the development of genuine leadership capabilities, and ultimately, the opportunity to build a legacy based not on personal vindication, but on shared success. My girlfriend had said I'd never amount to anything. Now I was CEO of the company, where she served as a C-suite executive. And somehow, against all odds, we had both found our way to exactly where we were meant to be. Not despite our painful shared history, but because of how we had each grown through and beyond it. That, I realized as I looked out from my office at the company I would soon lead, was the most unexpected victory of all.